So, for the past month or so, I've been watching the Avatar series, both The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. This video idea came to me when I went ahead and peeped the IMDb ratings for both shows, something I often do when I decide to tackle a huge franchise that many people watched over many years. That way, I can get a general idea of how the audience felt at the time. The Last Airbender is sitting at 9.3 out of 10 at the time of writing this video, whereas Legend of Korra is sitting at 8.4 out of 10. I think both of these scores are utterly ridiculous in their own right, and I could go in depth as to why I think IMDb is bad platform in general, but it seems to me like this is a pointless task. So instead, I went to my second source for audience ratings, YouTube, and boy was I disappointed. As you probably figured out by the thumbnail, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is considerably less good than people remember it to be. I also think The Legend of Korra is considerably better than people think it is. Many video essays dissing the latter have been made and keep being made, whereas people keep praising The Last Airbender as if it was a masterpiece that should almost be considered separate to The Legend of Korra. Let me be clear when I say this. This is a stupid, dumb take, and I can't stand hearing it anymore. Which is why I decided to make this video. I want to take a deep dive into both shows, what they have to offer, and how they displayed their message to their respective audiences. I also wanted to mention a couple things. From what I heard, there's a glitch going on with YouTube where people are getting unsubbed from my channel, so if you've been here before, feel free to subscribe once again. If you've never been here before, hi, my name is V and this is my channel. I hope you'll have a great time over the course of the video. I worked really hard on it, and I think it came out really good. Speaking of, I'll first be going over why Avatar: The Last Airbender still deserves praise for what it does right, but also why it is not as good as you think it might be. Then, I'm gonna show you why The Legend of Korra is a great show, but also what went wrong with it. Alright, enough with the intro, onto the video.
Water. Earth. Fire. Air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years passed and my brother and I discovered the new Avatar, an airbender named Aang. And although his airbending skills are great, he has a lot to learn before he's ready to save anyone. But I believe Aang can save the world.
Unlike some other YouTubers, I won't stoop so low as to only show you the bad side of The Last Airbender. Keep in mind that I genuinely think this is a good series, which is something that's pretty rare when you're doing a kids show. I mean, you're in the same category as some hot garbage, so it's only fair to say that a show that's even just above average in quality is very rare in this industry. So here's what Avatar: The Last Airbender has going for it, first and foremost. The Last Airbender, unlike a lot of kids shows, doesn't take its targeted audience for a bunch of idiots. It approaches themes in a manner that's easy to grasp, with some vulgarization and good storytelling, but never in a way that's belittling or demeaning towards the audience. The creators of the show, Brian Konietzko and Michael Dante DiMartino, clearly know what they're doing. They realize their audience is young, but not dumb. And I think this is most clear in the dialogue of their characters and the situations they're put in. Their commentaries on the events that unfold shows a level of self-awareness that was very rare for the time, and expects the audience to understand that sarcasm for the punch to land. Episode 4 of the third book, Sokka's Master, has a great scene that illustrates just this. Sokka is pretty depressed because out of everyone in the group, he's the only non-bender, and he feels like he's pretty much useless in many fights and situations. So to cheer him up, they go shopping, which then leads to him finding a sword and then a master to train under. Very cool. But during that shopping scene, there was one specific moment where I was laughing my ass off, but in hindsight, a lot of kids might have only found it funny for the slapstick humor it brings.
What do you think? Pretty slick, huh? All I need to complete the outfit is a wind sword.
What's a wind sword?
Is where I get a sword handle, and then I just swing this around and bend air out like a blade.
Yeah, nice.
I'll just stick to what I got.
I thought that was a really brilliant moment because it derives its humors from satirizing stereotypical animation tropes of the time. Having crazy, insane armor is probably the most impractical thing you could ever have on a battlefield, and the writers are clearly playing with our prior knowledge of the genre for their joke to land. On a darker note, another way the show doesn't think of its audience as stupid idiots is when the show comes to a point where it needs to act upon the stakes it's built through the story. What I mean is this: in Season 1 of The Last Airbender, we know the Fire Nation plans on conquering the Northern Water Tribe. The plan General Zhao came up with is downright evil. Let's kill the Moon Spirit so the waterbenders can't bend anymore. So yeah, his plan is to kill the moon, and he does. The waterbenders get absolutely blasted and they don't have any way to defend themselves. The only reason why they were able to save themselves is because Yue, the princess of the Northern Water Tribe, was saved as a kid by the Moon Spirit, and she has a part of its life force within her. So how exactly does she save the Water Tribe? She downright kills herself and gives back the Moon Spirit what was hers to begin with. And it's a really touching moment. They have a big part of the episode with no color at all, except for the eyes of Yue, the mystical waters Aang is bending, and the fire that's coming out of the firebenders, just to convey how grim the rest of the situation is compared to the only things at that moment which could shift the fate of this encounter. This is great cinematography, and this story beat would not be able to land so perfectly at the end of Season 1 if that character did not die. Try to put yourself in 2005 in front of a television screen after coming back from school and seeing this happening. It was impressive for the time, but even today it holds up pretty damn well, with a lot of children's animation shying away from any sort of darker, grimmer topics such as the death of a loved one. Of course, this probably would mean nothing without the actual themes the show talks about. It's also probably why it resonated with an older audience also, either much later when the original audience grew up, or after it was initially released on Nickelodeon. People tend to forget that The Last Airbender is a show about genocide, free will, morality, imperialism, sacrifice, legacy, and much more. Bear in mind, this show was airing at the same time as SpongeBob, Kim Possible, Little Einsteins, Drake and Josh, and some other garbage. Not to say that these shows were garbage, just saying that, there was some pretty bad shows in there. The selection of animated shows you could get were really not that great, especially if you were looking for a cartoon that had these types of themes. You had Samurai Jack on Cartoon Network, which had moments with deeper themes, maybe Batman sometimes, but that was really rare, maybe Teen Titans sometimes, but it really wasn't marketed towards children. For my French gamers out there, or the people in bilingual countries like myself, you also had Code Lyoko, but it was so convoluted at times that it really was difficult to follow. Bringing these themes to children and presenting them in a child-friendly way is really, really hard, and it's a skill not a lot of people take into account when bringing up the strengths of The Last Airbender. When I think of this, I really think Books 2 shines especially well in that department. Firstly, you have the story arc of Aang. He arrives in the Earth Kingdom thinking he's safe and immediately gets betrayed by a dude who wants to exploit his avatar state. Then he gets to the city of one of his great friends and finds it totally dominated by the Fire Nation. On top of that, he thinks his buddy has gone positively insane only to discover he's actually just waiting for the right time to strike. Great. He gets to a village where statues of him and his reincarnations are getting burned and leaves the place alive only because he was able to do some shenanigans thanks to Avatar Kyoshi. He then gets relentlessly chased by Azula where he's unable to catch her. He then goes into a mystical library to get the needed information on when the comet is gonna show up, only to have his best buddy and only living remnant of his culture apart from him taken away by some sandbenders. They, again, barely manage to leave alive. Aang freaks out on the sandbenders when he finds them because they don't have Appa. They then go to Ba Sing Se, where on the way they were attacked by a giant monster which would have taken their lives again if it weren't for some crazy bendings and fast reactions. On arrival, they have no time to search for the fluffy companion because a literal goddamned drill on wheels out of something Warhammer 40k would make is trying to pierce the outer wall of Ba Sing Se and finally take it down for the glory of the Fire Nation. So how do they get rewarded for taking it down? By facing a literal Gestapo within the walls of the city so that conformity can be imposed on the people to control them more easily. When they find their lair, They almost get attacked and almost lose their life once again. Jet almost dies, I mean, come on. Aang finds Appa, very cool, but they have bigger fish to fry because the Earth King had absolutely no idea what the hell was going on inside or outside of his walls. The Dai Li still try to kill Aang and the gang, only to be cut from both sides when they learn that the Fire Nation has infiltrated the Earth Nation thanks to Azula, Mai, and Tai Li, who've been posing as the Kyoshi warriors this whole time. Aang almost dies once again right after reaching enlightenment, courtesy of a lightning strike by Azula, and only remains alive because Katara is competent enough to have kept the spirit water from the first season and to heal Aang with it. Now they don't have anywhere to go, little to no allies with which they can meet up, and a barely alive Avatar on their hands. Boom, end of season 2. Through 20 episodes, the story of Aang touches on themes of desolation, sacrilege and blasphemy, loss of a loved one, grief, fighting against tyrannical forces, enlightenment and death. But wait, Billy May is here. There's more. That accounts for like, what, ballpark to 60 to 70% of the whole season? We also have the story of Zuko, which, if you've checked out videos on him before on YouTube, is really pretty good, but it goes as follows. Zuko and Iroh are stuck in the middle of nowhere in Earth Nation territory. They're considered traitors to the Fire Nation and enemies to the Earth Nation. Azula tracks down both of them, only to try and capture them to bring them back to the Fire Nation. They escape, and Iroh and Zuko cut their hair off to hide themselves, also symbolically cutting ties with the Fire Nation tradition. They get taken in by a family of ex-refugees, and Zuko responds to their hospitality by stealing from them. Very cool, Zuko. They're now begging on the streets for coins. Zuko's real tired of this whole situation and steals some more stuff to his uncle's surprise. When Iroh confronts him, he ups and leaves instead of changing his ways. We learn about his backstory a little more after he joins a little family in a village being ruled by a couple of bored soldiers. Zuko understands the situation is whack and tries to help, because it's his way of dealing with his own trauma. When he reveals he's a firebender, the whole village sends him away even though he only tried to help. Zuko then meets up with the Avatar and Azula when they're fighting, gets ass blasted and feels bad when he finally meets up with his uncle, but gets hurt because he's incompetent. The two chill together, and Iroh teaches Zuko how to redirect lightning, and he generally teaches him a lot of his wisdom, explaining to Zuko that there is merit in what seems useless at first. They then get chased down by the rough rhinos and leave with their lives intact. Iroh then pulls off the White Lotus shenanigans and manages to outmaneuver the guys who want to take him in for a reward. They're both able to sneak into Ba Sing Se, with Iroh starting his own tea shop and all that. Zuko owns Jet, who gets sent to the Gestapo teaching bootcamp. Iroh does so well with his shop that he's offered his own shop in the upper rings. Very, very cool. Zuko confronts Iroh on his desire for greatness. Iroh calls him out on his bullshit, but he follows Zuko because he's his nephew and he cares about him. So when Zuko decides to let the Avatar Bison go free because Iroh finally has had enough of his bullshit and he imposes a crisis of conscience on him, Iroh is obviously very proud of him. However, Zuko essentially just acted completely differently from how he usually does, and he goes through a real existential crisis. Who is he and what does he want in life? Iroh explains that this isn't natural and he's at war with himself. So when he wakes up and acts like a totally different person, Iroh is really suspicious of whatever is going on, then really surprised, but pleasantly so. To Iroh, Zuko has just won the war against himself and he could not be happier. They have a great bonding moment where Zuko loves the tea shop because Iroh loves the tea shop, and Zuko loves Iroh. But turns out that their happiness is exploitable, and Azula makes sure of that by trying to kill them, capture them, whatever. She attacks them after baiting them into the royal palace. Zuko then regresses and tries to face Azula, where Iroh does this.
Come on! You'll be fine!
No! I'm tired of running. It's time I faced Azula.
Iroh goes to the Avatar crew for help, and even Katara seems a little more inclined to helping Zuko after he shares his story with her. Iroh finds Zuko and explains that even if he won what was supposed to be the whole war, he still has one more step. The crossroads of his destiny. Zuko then regresses further and joins up with Azula instead of following in Iroh's steps, as his trauma is not fully dealt with yet. Iroh is obviously very disappointed in this development, and boom, end of season 2. So not only did we go through themes of desolation, sacrilege, blasphemy, loss of a loved one, grief, fighting against tyrannical forces, enlightenment and death, but also betrayal, family, tradition, morality, good and evil, following one's own path, love, wisdom, merit, resolving conflict, choosing your own faith, existential crisis, self-awareness, destiny, and allegiance. A story so jam-packed with perspectives and themes was essentially never done before, and this makes The Last Airbender a precursor in the field of children's animation. It paved the way for a whole lot of other shows to step in and present a more mature story, and for that I am genuinely thankful, because without it we wouldn't have some of the best kids shows ever made. The variety is outstanding, and the fact that this is all coherent within the story makes it all even better. A lot of shows try to touch on very deep and mature subjects, but essentially twist the narrative around the goal of exposing those themes to the viewers, which I find cheap because it comes off across as an artificial means to an end. Whereas The Last Airbender has this organically. These themes arise from the events of the world and how the characters react when these events occur. Speaking of organically filling the story of the show, another thing The Last Airbender does extremely well is backstories. This isn't something I saw mentioned a whole lot, but some people did, which I'm thankful for. Every action the characters take is informed to some degree, and every action they have stems from what appears to be genuine history. In episode 16 of Book 1, The Deserter, Aang finally meets what could be called his first firebending teacher, Zhang Zhang. At this point in the show, Aang still thinks he can mess around with the elements and have fun with his duty as the Avatar. He doesn't understand either the scope of what he can do to the world or the intensity with which he can bring that change. This all changes when Aang is messing around with firebending and wants to show off in front of Katara and ends up burning her. What I was really surprised by is Sokka in that whole sequence. He doesn't hesitate to jump on the most powerful bender he's ever seen, thanks to the events of episode 14 where Aang stops a literal volcano from raising a village, and he puts him in an arm lock to berate him on what he just did. He's had enough of his behavior and he wants him to stop. Even if this interaction might seem a little weird considering the fact that Aang is, well, the Avatar and Sokka is a non-bender and they've been on great terms so far, he completely switched his approach to Aang when he saw what he did to his sister, and it makes perfect sense. We've had plenty of exposition in the episode right before on this very topic. Sokka and Katara are brother and sister, true, but they're also the only ones they can 100% rely on if ever something terrible happens, at least at this point in the story. They have a lot of history together, and Sokka has always been the one that was tasked with protecting the people around him, be it his village or his sister. And this isn't something we've just been introduced to in the last episode. This is something that's been gradually built up over the course of the season up until this point. So when Sokka jumps on Aang angrily to subdue him, we all know Aang could escape and beat him up if he wanted to. We know Sokka is conscious of that also, but he doesn't care. It's his duty to protect his sister, even if it means putting his friendship and task with the Avatar on the line. But the show doesn't only build that exposition before a big moment, like in the case of Sokka and Aang. It can give you just enough to contextualize what's happening, move on, and keep building up that exposition throughout the rest of the show. When Toph decides to run away with the rest of the gang, it initially makes sense because her parents are so overprotective of her. She just wants to get away. Not only that, but she also feels more accomplished when she is able to fight other people and work towards something, even if it's as trivial as winning an underground championship. Probably because she's blind and that causes a whole bunch of issues with her parents once again. Fine, okay, that's good enough. End of episode 6. She makes a pact to help Aang with earthbending, and they all embark on their journey towards Ba Sing Se. All is well with the world. Except that Toph didn't mention getting along with anyone else, or helping the others, or anything else really. That's something the show picks up on quite fast and makes us aware of in episode 8 of book 2, The Chase. We then get to know more about Toph and her situation. She doesn't want to help set up camp or help others because she's self-sufficient and independent in nature. She doesn't need anything or anyone, so why the hell would she help other people? Just pull your own weight, it's that easy, bro. When Katara asks for her to come around and help them unpack and set up camp, Toph gets frustrated because she doesn't understand why there's an issue in the first place. To her, having an engagement with the Avatar was her ticket inside of the group. Katara is trying to make it clear that being part of the group entails certain tasks and whatnot, but Toph didn't sign up for that. She doesn't want to deal with all that BS, to which Katara says she's being selfish, etc. It's actually quite nice. The fact that those backstories and what derives from them can be elaborated on at any point in the show. But it doesn't stop there. They can also expand on characters and their backstories and what derives from them during the regular pace of the story. No prior setup or later expansion on it, just the whole thing directly from the get-go. In the episode where Aang loses Appa, we get to see a remorseful side to Toph, something that we've never really seen her be before. But what's interesting is Aang and his reaction to losing Appa. In the episode right after, The Desert, Aang does something we've never really seen him do either. He acts evil. That's really fucking weird because, well, he's the main character, but most importantly, we've only seen him in a positive light before. We're not stopping the story or adding on to it, however, to see this side of Aang. We're progressing naturally through the narrative, but because of the circumstances of the world and their situation in it, we're able to build up those characters. Aang leaves his friends in the middle of the desert, knowing full well how dangerous it is for people to be left stranded in the middle of nowhere. Toph can't see anything because the sand is dispersing any waves she'd be able to see with her feet. Sokka and Momo can't do anything because they're tripping balls on cactus juice. Aang comes back and is too hurt to be able to realize what kind of trouble he's in. The only one who can actually do anything about the situation is Katara, and she's definitely the MVP in this situation. She rations water appropriately, she reads the stars and orients the group in the right direction, she trucks them along even if they want to give up and stop. She even has an amazing idea when a cloud shows up to fill up her pouch with water so they'll be able to survive. Aang acts like an asshole and does so reluctantly, and when Katara notices there's barely any water, Aang snaps at his friend and calls out Katara. She doesn't even take it personally too. Obviously she's hurt, but there's no time for this kind of petty arguments. They're in a desert and they could seriously die out there. They find a sand sailboat and they're able to find a rock. Katara thinks there might be water and Aang thinks there might be sandbenders who know where Appa is. Not ominous at all. They get attacked by a bunch of bug vultures, and Aang kills one for no good reason other to let off some steam. Not ominous at all. They then meet some sandbenders, and Toph recognizes one of them, and Aang obliterates their sailboats. He then gets so angry the Avatar state shows up, and he's ready to destroy them all. Except there's literally a single one in the group with a brain and a heart, so Katara pulls through and stops him from killing them. We saw a side of Aang we never had seen before, but we kept seeing it as the story progressed until they found Appa again, which we could aptly name Asshole Aang. But we also saw that Katara was like this pillar in the group. She's the one that keeps everyone grounded and keeps a clear head when shit hits the fan. She's the dependable one. These things all make sense because of the backstories that are pre-established, expanded upon, or constructed along the progression of the story. It can even be across episodes or even seasons. We saw Katara as the truly dependable one in that episode, but we expand on that in episode 3 of season 3, The Painted Lady. An already multi-dimensional character like Katara gets even another layer of depth thanks to the fact that she wants to be so dependable and helpful that it can become dangerous for herself and others. She doesn't veer away from using the culture and needs of others in whatever she sees fit in order to help the people around her. It's something that's so important to her that she's willing to put the initial mission of saving the world against Fire Lord Ozai in jeopardy if it means she can help others. It becomes a real issue, but that all makes sense because we've had so much exposition about Katara and her character that it's an organic way forward. When Zuko sees the error in his ways, it makes a whole bunch of sense because he's seen every point of view. It's the organic way forward. He's been alone and with people, at the helm of an important mission and a nobody. He's been valued as a person and considered as trash also. He's seen a more materialistic approach to glory and happiness thanks to Azula and Ozai, and a more spiritual one thanks to Iroh. When he gets what he wants the most and yet still feels empty, which prompts him to seek inner peace elsewhere, it makes sense that he would try to mend his previous mistakes with the Avatar crew. But that's the thing. Avatar: The Last Airbender makes sense. The story and the characters are built upon the backstories, which are so solid that, well, everything else has to match. In other words, it's rigid. There is little flexibility within the structure of the show to allow the writers to do something different. And that's the beginning of my issues with Avatar: The Last Airbender, because you see, The Last Airbender is 61 episodes long, but most people remember the strong story beats. A lot, and I mean a lot, of individuals seem to forget that a whole lot of each episode is dedicated to setting up those story beats, be it before, after, or during the actual story. Take my favorite example of this, Episode 4 of Book 1, The Warriors of Kyoshi Island. Aang and the gang need to escape the clutches of the firebenders on their trail, and need to do so quickly and efficiently. Aang, however, wants to stop at Kyoshi Island to show off to Katara. Sure, fine, sounds like a good plan for an episode, right? We have a 23-minute episode, from which we can remove 55 seconds for the intro and 51 seconds for the outro. We're down to 21 minutes of animation, with which we can essentially break down the episodes into 3 parts thanks to the breaks from the main crew we get with the firebender side of the story. The first is the exposition. We're essentially being told what's up with this island, what's going on, the history behind it, etc. The exposition lasts until 7:25, roughly 6 minutes or so after Iroh gets his fish yoinked. We then enter the setup, the second part of the episode. This is where problems occur, where the tension is built up, where the shit is being prepped and the fan turned on. Aang and Katara have their storyline where the Avatar loves being praised and Katara clearly sees that this isn't like him. Sokka is being a misogynist and gets his ass kicked, but learns a thing or two over the course of his stay on the island. Then, the firebenders show up at 17:10, meaning the second part lasts around 10 minutes, and we get into the third and final part, the story beat. Conflict occurs after the issues in the second part are cleared up, and we get progress in the main actual story. Then the episode ends at 22:18. When the credits start rolling. This follows a similar pattern to the tension, conflict resolution found often in storytelling, but applied directly to the cinematographic format, which I find is a pretty brilliant way to apply it. However, this doesn't necessarily make for good storytelling, or at least not efficient storytelling. We spent 16 minutes watching shenanigans unfold to get to 5 minutes of relevant events. And you might think I'm cherry picking this episode in particular, but this is all over the show. Episode 7 of Book 2, Zuko Alone, tells its story exactly the same way. The structure of each episode is fairly similar, so 21 minutes of animation where the writers can tell their story is the norm. We get a previously before segment which helps with the exposition, and then the actual exposition of the episode from 1 minute and 25 seconds to 10 minutes and 40 seconds. That's 9 minutes of exposition, with which we learn that Zuko's traveling the Earth Kingdom alone, arrives at a village to restock and relax, a bunch of soldiers are controlling the village and its people, a nice family takes Zuko in and he helps them around for a bit. Zuko and his mom were pretty close to one another. Azula was always a little psychopathic, and the little dude on the farm likes Zuko and he teaches him a thing or two with his sword. We then get the tension built up, from 10:40 to 17:20. so about 6 minutes of build-up. In that time, the only relevant build-up for that episode occurs when the soldiers show up at the farm, confront the family, and leave after Zuko stands between them. The rest of the build-up is Azula and Zuko's backstory, which we'll get back to in just a moment. From 1720 to 2340, we get the story beat. But during that story beat, we also get some more exposition on Azula and Zuko. The actual story beat for that episode occurs over the span of like 4 minutes, when Zuko fights the soldiers, almost gets overpowered, and brings out his firebending to seal the deal, but gets shunned away from the village at the same time. So let's say we have this whole episode at around 21 minutes of content. We have 17 minutes in the first 2 parts worth of exposition, plus another 2 of exposition during the fight. That's 19 minutes of exposition in a 21-minute episode. Most of that exposition concerns Azula and Zuko, and while it is cool to learn more about that character, it also serves little to no purpose for this episode. Because the actual goal of showing all of these flashbacks is to set up the backstory for the episode right after, the chase, where Zuko meets back with Iroh and fights Azula. This is something that The Last Airbender does really often, because it needs to set up so much in order to have the story beats properly delivered that it often impedes on other episodes. And you get what a lot of people could call quote-unquote filler episodes, where some of the information that's relevant to the story is still being conveyed through it. I really don't like the term filler episodes. I think it's derogatory towards the work of the writers, but I could at least justify the term filler scenes. The goal of Zuko alone is to be a setup for the chase, so it's not entirely a filler episode, but what exactly was the goal of that whole interaction with the Earth Kingdom soldiers and that family in the village if the purpose of it all is to simply have those flashbacks happen? You could achieve the exact same result with Zuko sitting down at an inn and reminiscing about his past, but that would be less contextually viable. I understand that. It's really irritating to have to sit through what seems like a throwaway episode to get the proper information about Zuko and his past, because we know Avatar can do better. When Aang visits the Southern Air Temple in the aptly named episode of Season 1, he freaks out, and the Avatar state is activated when he gets really mad about his mentor, Monk Gyatso, and his friends' deaths. Like, there's still some flashbacks here and there, but again, they're contextually meaningful, so whatever. The main bulk of the story and exposition about Aang's past is done through him exploring the remnants of a dead civilization. That's absolutely brilliant because it's fully organic. Zuko alone is not organic because the story is the goal of the visual element of the episode, whereas the Southern Air Temple is organic because the visual element of the episode is the goal of the story. When Aang is going through his memories and reminiscing about the purpose of the areas he's in, the writers are doing this so that the animation team can show us the story. When Zuko is going through his memories because of the events that are happening to him, the writers are doing so to tell us the story. The animation team and their work is second thought. It's something that comes after, but it shouldn't, because it goes against one of the show's greatest strengths, which is to not take its audience for a bunch of morons. Even a kid can figure out visual storytelling if you make it obvious enough. Stop trying to shove it down our throats through meaningless exposition. Fucking hell, the whole ending to Book 1 has that exact issue. Twice in a row because the ending has 2 parts. In The Siege of the North, they go over the fact that waterbenders can get their powers from the spirit of the moon 3 times. The first is when Iroh advises against attacking at night because the waterbenders are stronger when the moon is in the sky. The second is when Yue is talking to Katara and Aang about the fact that waterbenders are stronger when the moon is in the sky. The third is when Aang goes into the spirit world to get some help from the spirits because waterbenders are stronger when the moon is in the sky. Obviously, the third one is visual, but still 3 times. And that's only in the first part. In the second one, it's even worse. Zhao announces to Iroh he intends to remove the moon as a factor because waterbenders are stronger when the moon is in the sky. Then the Fire Nation attacks the Northern Water Tribe and the waterbenders are doing some cool stuff and we get a shot of the moon behind the bows because the waterbenders are stronger when the moon is in the sky. Then Zhao pulls the fish out of the water and the moon turns red and oh no, the waterbenders are losing their power because they're stronger when the moon is in the sky, you guys, don't you get it? Then Zhao kills the moon spirit fish and the waterbenders are screwed because there is no moon anymore because the waterbenders are stronger. What is this guy? I can't anymore. I can't do it. I can't do it. Why do you have to repeat yourself 73 trillion times? We fucking get it. The moon is the source of the waterbending. We get it. Stop. Why do you need to have so much exposition? Just let Zhao kill the fish and make the moon go away. Boom, the waterbenders have no powers. You don't even have to make them say a single word. Keep that mute aesthetic with the black and white. It'll make perfect sense even for a kid. Seriously, I genuinely challenge you to find an episode where this kind of exposition through multiple episodes doesn't happen, except the last 4 episodes of Book 3. They're outliers because it's the climax of their show and its story is spread out over 4 episodes, so it's full of story beats because it's the ending of a lot of storylines. But before that, it's open season, baby, and I'm not talking about the movie. It's genuinely super annoying to have episodes filled with either repetition or exposition that doesn't affect what's going on screen whatsoever. That is a big flaw in how The Last Airbender tells its story. You might say, but V, this isn't a flaw in storytelling, it's just how the show goes. It's a quirk, not an issue. To which I have to tell you, you're partly right. This is a quirk of The Last Airbender and how it tells its story, however, it is an issue because it's unregulated. Remember when I said the backstories were so solid everything had to match? Well, this is the reason why every episode of The Last Airbender spends so much time setting up every single fucking story beat. And it's by far the best thing the show has to offer in my opinion because it capitalizes on everything else the show is doing, aka the teams and how they're presented, and provides something that's truly worthwhile to anyone watching the show: perspective. Having multiple characters from different backgrounds express their thoughts and emotions on a singular subject allows you to perceive it from many angles, rendering your own comprehension whole on the matter. It's why Zuko is such an amazing character. He has such an amazing backstory that even if he comes from the enemy, you can understand his position. That's really fucking hard to do in any media. It's why Dostoevsky is such a genius in my opinion. However, that being said, this isn't necessary for every single character. It's necessary for some characters, but in a lot of cases, I don't think it really matters all that much because we could get a sufficient grasp of their perspective on a subject without knowing all of their backstory. But the show defaults to exposition whenever it doesn't know what else to do, or gives up entirely on telling a backstory because it's the only fucking way it knows how to tell us what a character's perspective is. Meaning that if there is an inconvenience forcing the writers to find something else, they either avoid it or quit. Which leads us to another thing Avatar: The Last Airbender clearly has issues with: pacing. Holy shit, can I not stand the goddamned pacing in this show. I don't mean within each episode, but from episode to episode on the season scale of things. It is by far one of its weakest points in my honest opinion, and the worst part about it is that I'm not even sure it's totally because of the way The Last Airbender tells its story. I mean, if you look at Book 1, there are so many episodes where 75% of what happens has little to no impact on the general story. But that remaining 25% is absolutely massive and has huge consequences on how the characters act and think for the rest of their show, or how we perceive them during their screen time. Episode 14 of Book 1, The Fortune Teller, is a great example of this. We get back to the gang trying to find food for the day, when they fall on a stranger baiting and dodging the attacks of a platypus bear. The gang saves him, but the dude says it was ultimately useless because he already knew his fate thanks to the fortune teller. He also gives them a few items and goes back on his merry way. Curious, they head to the nearest village to meet that fortune teller. There's this whole thing between the fortune teller servant and Aang, where she's supposed to be his love interest, I guess? Anyway, Katara goes first, and Aang is such an impatient little weasel that he sneaks up to the door and listens to the session, and hears this.
Do you see anything interesting in my love line?
I see a great romance for you. The man you're going to marry.
Tell me more.
I can see that he's a very powerful bender.
And obviously, Aang is ridiculously rejoiced at this, because it probably means that he's gonna end up with his crush. Sokka gets roasted, and the fortune teller picks Aang instead. They crack a bone to read some lines or something, I'm really not sure, but the point is to be some type of divination effort. The bone fucking shatters in a million pieces and the fortune teller loses her shit, but Aang already knows about everything she's telling him. He asks for a love reading, and the fortune teller tells him the truth about not seeing anything, followed by an obvious lie with the most vague description ever. Then we also see that Aunt Wu, the fortune teller, also reads the clouds to tell the village its general fate. Cool beans. Katara gets obsessed with Aunt Wu telling her her destiny, so she pesters her again, and we get another scene with that girl to hype up a love prospect for Aang. Even Sokka's in on it? It's weird. Anyway, Aang meets up with Katara and applies Sokka's tricks, but it really doesn't work, so he wants to give her a moon lily instead. He goes up to the mountain only to realize it's full of fucking lava and it's going to raise the village. They try to wake the village up, but obviously they all believe Aunt Wu, so they want to manipulate them by stealing the book she uses to read them. Okay, this is starting to be really weird. Aang sneaks up in the room only to have the servant and him have this sort of touchy-feely moment. He yoinks the book, and with the help of Katara, they bend the clouds in a particular manner so that Aunt Wu can read them and give them the get-go. 20 minutes into the episode, the gang is finally able to do their duty and save the village. Sokka has this pretty good idea of making a trench to save the people. Okay, not bad. Let's go with that. The lava starts flowing, and it's too much for the trenches to handle, so Aang instead cools an entire lava wall around the village. Honestly badass, and then Sokka says...
Man, sometimes I forget what a powerful bender that kid is.
Wait, what did you just say?
Nothing, just that Aang is one powerful bender.
Which shocks Katara because it probably means the fortune teller actually did say something right this time. The gang then gives the book back, the fortune teller tells Aang the truth about her love reading, and then tells Aang he has the power to shape his destiny however he sees fit. And boom, pretty much the end of the episode. Okay, let's do a little exercise. Did you notice when the writers realized they were still writing an episode of Avatar? Here, I'll give you a little hint. It's when everyone was in immediate danger of death. Yeah, honestly, it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to understand that when Aang discovers the volcano is about to blow, the whole episode changes completely. I think this is a great example of how the pacing in Avatar: The Last Airbender is super weird because it illustrates simultaneously how internal pacing, so the pacing of the episode itself, and the external pacing, aka the pacing of the entire show, both have some pretty big flaws, and that is thanks to the character of the fortune teller and what she entails. So when Katara meets the fortune teller for the first time, she tells her she's gonna end up with a really powerful bender. Aang knows this is confirmation for his own thoughts, and we know it's true because the entire show has been hinting at the Aang-Katara relationship up until this point. We also know it's true because the fortune teller's abilities aren't completely bogus. The bone exploding is proof of that. We also know by the end of the episode that what turns out to be bogus, she does intentionally, like the love lie she told Aang. Now, here's a great question. We all know Aang-Katara is a thing, so why the fuck is the whole thing with the servant even a plot point to begin with? Even kids could see that coming from a mile away. We've never seen this girl beforehand in the show out of nowhere, and now you're telling me we're supposed to take her as a serious love pick for Aang? Why? And I mean, it's not even because she's only met him that one episode, because Sokka and Suki met once on Kyoshi Island and they had chemistry. It's because of the pacing. We were told way too soon in the episode that Katara's gonna end up with Aang, so there's absolutely no tension to be had there at all. It's like the show itself doesn't even consider her to be fair game. Not only is Aang not interested, but Katara doesn't interact with her at all. It could have made for a really interesting dynamic if Aang cared about Katara, but Katara didn't care about Aang. The servant cared about Aang, but Aang didn't care about her. And Katara's out for the servant because she thinks she wants to mess with him and it's gonna take her longer to get going with the mission. But even that couldn't possibly happen because Katara's obsessed with the fortune teller, or maybe that's how she builds tension with the servant in the first place. Anyway, you get what I mean. Information is dished out at such weird places during the episodes that most time it ends up working against the show and its story. Oh, and also Sokka confirming that Aang is that powerful bender completely takes away any potential love tension you could get later on in the show. The writers were at least smart enough to put Jet and his relationship with Katara before this episode, because if you swapped them around, the Jet episode would lose all credibility. Oh, but wait, that's exactly what happens a whole season later when Jet makes a comeback to help the Avatar crew with Ba Sing Se and Lake Lao Gai. It's like the show is trying to tease us with the fact that Jet and Katara might still become a thing since they're exes, but there's again absolutely no tension here. Oh, and that whole thing where Katara knows she's gonna marry Aang, that sort of knowledge of your future destiny, you wanna see how that plays out between them? How she's gonna try to deal with that fact, and if she really wants this destiny to be imposed on her in the first place? Screw you, man, you'll only see the outcome of all this setup in Book 3, Episode 17. The episode before the finale of the show. I can't be the only one to not only find the pacing odd, but downright annoying and bad at multiple points in the show, right? I mean, why did we even have this episode in the first place? So that we could know that Katara was gonna end up with Aang? Why do we need to know so we have a payoff 2 seasons later? Just let the tension build up over that time and let them deal with it during that episode in season 3. That would have made the Ember Island players a much better episode if you ask me. We also never see another diviner for the rest of the show. Like, is Aunt Wu one of a kind? Is it some kind of bending or is it just some spiritual shenanigans? I want to know more about her and her abilities. That shit is sick. Why do you have to make me sit through 4 minutes of Sokka trying to be a Richards Dawkins type atheist? This shit infuriates me to no end, I swear. Think of episode 15, book 2, Tales of Ba Sing Se. From a storytelling perspective, this is a pretty good episode in my opinion. The idea of having these multiple characters in the same place, living their day-to-day lives, can be a great way to learn intricacies about them that we couldn't learn in any other way. What is pretty garbage in that episode is the pacing. Like, you have Toph and Katara going for a girls' day out and then they get laughed at by a bunch of bitches. Cruel woman moment. Anyway, they kick their butts and then there's this amazing scene where Toph opens up and shows a side of herself we've never seen before. She's always an independent, strong and cranky character. She's one of the best earthbenders ever, so she doesn't get hurt all that much too. But then we see something that really struck her. She explains that because she's blind, she's never really had to care about appearances. She says she doesn't care what she looks like. She says she isn't looking for anyone's approval. And she says she knows who she is, but then starts crying. Because obviously she cares about these things. It's not like she hasn't thought of them before. She just built up a shell around her so thick that she can block anything that's coming her way. But this moment, this little 20-second moment, is exactly the type of thing that makes Avatar great. Seeing characters being weak is actually a good thing because it proves they're multi-dimensional, not a single note. Speaking of characters being weak, we have the following segment with Iroh. You see Iroh being his usual self, buying groceries and helping other people. When a kid starts to cry, Iroh comes and cheers him up. Because that's what a strong and wise person does. When he runs away from an angry giant dude and ends up being robbed by another guy, he disarms him and then teaches him how to be a better robber. But then he pulls a switcheroo, telling him he knows he's not a criminal. Instead, he has a good long talk with him over a cup of tea and imparts some of his wisdom to him, because that's what a strong and wise person does. But when Iroh is all alone and he needs to mourn the death of his son in the city where he lost him, you see where all that strength and wisdom comes from. He's vulnerable, alone, and emotional. Who's to be the strong and wise person in that situation? Every time I see this little story about Iroh, my heart gets squeezed right up and it feels like a sucker punch to my tear ducts. It's by far one of the greatest emotional story beats the show has had to offer so far. It explains the depth with which Iroh perceives and acts within the world, and that's beautiful, man. But why this episode irritates me, even though I just gave it so much praise, is that it then goes ahead and fucks it up completely. You get a funny segment where Sokka learns haikus to pick up chicks, and one where Aang is helping out a zookeeper with funny monkeys. Right after some of the best character development we got for a long time for two beloved characters. Are the writers daft? Did no one in that room say, hey, maybe we should order these a little differently? Or, hey, maybe we should pick more serious themes for this episode? Nobody. What kind of absolute lunatic do you have to be to think this is a correct follow-up to what you just put on screen, man? You just pull a real tearjerker out of nowhere and immediately follow it up with, haha, I'm going to ridicule your art for the sake of poontang. Really? Fucking really? Of course, with so many things in The Last Airbender, this is a one-of, and we'll never see the zoo or the girls Sokka tried to pick up, or Toph being vulnerable, or Iroh mourning his son like that ever again. And for Toph and Iroh, I think it's fine, but because the structure of this episode is so different from everything else, I don't understand what the point is of having the two other segments just be regular entertainment. It's almost as if this whole episode was made to be a character builder, only to have half of the writers disagree and try to make it a funny, action-packed episode. I will say, however, not all episodes are like this, and some actually have really good payoffs for the wait. But yeah, pacing in The Last Airbender is pretty smelly, and that also affects storytelling pretty badly. Because no matter how you see it, having what you think are one-off characters that you write off pretty much completely become some of the most important individuals in the whole show is not subversive. It's just really difficult for the audience to adjust out of nowhere to seeing them in a totally new light. I do have to make clear that this is not the same as having a recurring character evolving throughout the story, or revealing to the audience what kind of power they hold. I really want to drive this point home because it's key to understanding why The Last Airbender has massive flaws when it comes to storytelling. When we first meet Iroh, he seems like a caring uncle who, despite the shitty behavior of his nephew, tries his best to guide him in the right direction with his wisdom and experience. Throughout the entire show, we see Iroh revealing his cards, but we know from the get-go that he has many cards in hand. This is established in episode 3 of book 1, when Zhao fights Zuko. He literally overpowers a commander of the fucking Fire Nation army like he's a mosquito. His carefree attitude towards the whole thing when he's basically in custody shows that he can, at any point, leave the vicinity and go on with his business. However, as shown in the beginning of the episode, Iroh is a man of wisdom, morality, and manners, all of which determine the fact that he is a disciplined, seasoned veteran who has more than likely seen way worse in his lifetime. All of which, by the way, is shown with what, a couple of minutes worth of screen time? Goes to show that the writers can be concise whenever they want to. So when he has connections to the White Lotus, or when he teaches Zuko to redirect lightning, or takes on Azula's firebender, or breaches the walls of Ba Sing Se, you're thinking, oh yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's fucking Iroh. Of course he'd have a trick up his sleeve. Because you've been following him the entire time, and even if the focus wasn't on him all the time, the times he showed up proved to be paced well enough that we knew what to expect. He's a certified Giga Chad with a degree in ass-kicking, whose understanding of the world is beyond what the main characters could ever imagine. Fair enough. But when we first meet Suki, we meet her in what seems like a throwaway episode. I mean, the show was still getting its footing and didn't quite know how the character dynamics would play out. Something you cannot really blame a show for, as most series tend to figure out how characters act and think with each other and the world after a few episodes, up to a season in certain cases. The amount of shows that have everything figured out from the get-go are extremely rare, and you can probably count them on your fingers. When working in television, it's fine if you don't have everything figured out. It'll naturally come together on the way. So when Suki appears in a single episode and is never seen again in book 1, you're probably thinking, oh, okay, this episode was a test to see how the characters would react in a situation like this. So Suki? Who the fuck cares about Suki? She's out of the picture. We don't think about her at all. So when she shows up 29 episodes later and essentially becomes a super important part of the story again, you're like, huh? Where the fuck do you come from? At first, I thought it was really neat, especially because, well, it made sense. They're competent warriors and are helping in a time of crisis. No big deal. But that's not the issue here. The issue is that it comes out of left field and asks the audience to adjust to the new importance of the characters. Imagine having a friend of yours leave one day and you adjust your perception of that person, only for them to barge back into your life again and become super fucking important. You might feel glad at first, but the more you think about it, the more you'll realize that something's not right. It's way too sudden and out of nowhere, and even if that friend of yours has a really good reason for showing up like this and is trying to become someone really close to you, you're gonna need an adjustment period. Well, There is no adjustment period in The Last Airbender. Oh, the swamp dudes show up to help the Fire Nation invasion. Welp, not a bunch of backwoods rednecks anymore. They're literally competent troops ready for war. Go fuck yourself. And it goes the other way too, by the way. Oh, here's Bato. He's a really fucking cool character that's acting as a surrogate father figure for one of the main characters. And here's a whole episode about him. Oh, you like him? Oh, you enjoy his presence on screen? Stick a thumb up your ass. Here's a minute of screen time in book 2. You won't see him again actually doing something worthwhile until the end of book 3. Eat shit and die. Seriously, I cannot stress out of fucking nowhere some of the most important things in the show come from. Some bits are straight up rushed or glanced over simply because they have no time to tell the backstory needed to properly set up the story beat. I'll get back to this in just a second, but seriously, some of the things that happen in The Last Airbender are incredibly rushed, and they have at least 20 episodes to tell them. Korra has 12 to 14 episodes for each book and never had things be that bad. This is because The Last Airbender has another glaring issue when it comes to its storytelling: the focus. Think of a moment when you would have liked to know more about a thing The Last Airbender was telling you about. Maybe it was when Aang met his first firebending teacher, and how he ended up in such a predicament. Maybe it was about the spirit library in the middle of the desert, and how such a building and concept would impact overall human knowledge. Maybe it was about the origins of that dude Zuko sent to kill Aang, and his crazy ability to send explosions out of his fucking forehead. Each and every one of these episodes have the exact same flaw. They present you something that's either really cool or seems really important in the grand scope of the universe in which the characters are living, but there is simply not enough screen time to cover it. I've already covered the Deserter, but with everything I said, did you ever hear me say anything about the Firebender Master himself? No, because here's everything we know about Zhang Zhang. He used to be an admiral in the Fire Nation Navy. He lost faith in the vision, he deserted and vowed to never teach firebending ever again. He believes fire is the element of destruction and pain, and he wishes he was born a waterbender. That's it. Okay, well, the episode is named The Deserter. What brought you to quit the ranks of your nation's army? No? Okay, see you on the Siege of Ba Sing Se in 2 seasons, I guess. Let's go with the Spirit Library then. We know the spirit who's in charge of the library, Wan Shitong, made the library accessible to humans at one point because he thought it would be beneficial for humans. Then, some firebenders tried to take advantage of the library's knowledge to gain the military upper hand, and Wan Shitong closed the library down. The Avatar and the gang are able to find this library thanks to one Professor Zay, an anthropology teacher at the Ba Sing Se University. Now, they get into that library, find a book about a solar eclipse, and then find a planetarium that's able to calculate the moment that solar eclipse is gonna show up, even though Wan Shitong didn't want them to. So he decides to bury his library to take his knowledge back. Okay, so a lot of questions there. Who's Wan Shitong and how did he build that library? I mean, he's an owl and his friends are foxes. Did he just find one and rode with it? Actually, bigger question, where do spirits come from? How do they come to be? Why is Wan Shitong the keeper of knowledge? Not only that, but how big is the library? Is it like a TARDIS or something? It's bigger on the inside? Actually, even bigger question, why did Wan Shitong say he was taking his knowledge back when he was putting the library into the ground? I mean, the obvious answer is that he's taking his literal pool of knowledge back, like he wants to take away the possibility for humans to learn in his library. Okay, well, he clearly has an otherworldly memory and is capable of remembering stuff from eons ago. Why didn't he just burn the damn thing? Well, we know he brings the knowledge back to the spirit world thanks to Korra later on. It could therefore be that he was taking back his knowledge in the spirit world, to which I have to say fair enough. However, that poses another question. Why did he bother coming to the material world in the first place? Because it could help humans? How did that come to be? Spirits usually want to keep to themselves. What made him think differently? It might seem like I'm piling on a lot of questions, but this is all stuff that went through my mind as I watched The Last Airbender. Wan Shitong and the library itself is such an important place with so much knowledge that you really have to question yourself as to where it came from. But the writers don't care, they want to truck the storyline along, so we focus on the main characters and their quest instead. Alright, fine, let's go with the Combustion Bender instead. What do we know about him? He has a really cool ability. He's probably some sort of mercenary or assassin because Zuko hires him. That's it. The literal name we have for him is Combustion Man. We don't even know his name. Zuko has got to know about it because he was able to track him down personally and arrange the track. Do you really think he wrote Combustion Man in the bottom corner of the letter he sent him or something? Obviously not. And I mean, this guy is a big deal. He's trying to kill the Avatar and his team multiple times in a row. He possesses an ability that redefines what is possible for a firebender to do. We had a whole exposition segment just about blood bending. We had another one about metal bending. This seems like a logical step forward. Combustion bending seems like the perfect, hyper-specific ability we're looking for to show the limits of what firebending can do. And here we are, with a nameless character with no explanation to his motives whatsoever except money, I guess, with an ability that's so important it can redefine an entire culture. So why are we not exploring this deeper? This is super important not only for us, the audience, but for the world building itself also. Okay, that should be enough. Now, I want you to think about that episode in the first book with the pirates and the water scroll, or the Tales of Ba Sing Se, especially that part with Aang and Sokka, or the beach episode, where Zuko, Mai, Ty Lee, and Azula are having a vacation. If you don't remember at all, first off, I don't blame you. Second, if you don't, just bear in mind these 3 episodes are mostly things that contribute very little to the overall world building and story of the show. The Water Scroll episode brings us a slightly more powerful Aang and Katara and essentially serves as a setup for some tension between them. The beach episode brings us some nice character building for the 4 main characters of the episode, but because the focus was the vacation, we mostly get volleyball games and a party. The firebending master, the library, the explosion bender, all of these things are fucking incredible, yet it seems like they shy away from it because it would be going too deep into the world building. Instead, with some of the episodes, the writers put the focus only on the events that were happening during that episode. Which is super weird because the show already has a tendency to set up for other episodes during prior or later episodes. It's just really confusing as to why they would do something like this. They're already going into such detail about the backstories of the character, such that they're spilling over from episode to episode, so why are we not spending time with some of the most interesting parts of the world the show has created? The firebending master is especially weird because they set up the other 2 masters pretty well. We got Toph, who becomes a main part of the gang, and we get plenty of exposition from her because she's a main character. But even the waterbending master, who's a total side character, still has more exposition about him than the firebending one. In episode 18 of book 1, the waterbending master, we meet Pakku. He's the one that's gonna teach Aang waterbending, except Katara also wants in on that deal. We learned that Pakku doesn't teach girls because girls are culturally healers within the Northern Water Tribe, and that should also extend to her, because she's in the Northern Water Tribe, not the Southern one. He belittles Katara as little more than a girl that wants to fight, but she's not fit to be a warrior in his eyes. He's a chauvinist cunt, and Katara has had enough of his bullshit, so she challenges him to a fight. We learn Pakku is actually Katara's grandfather, or was supposed to be, because the necklace she wears all the time is the betrothal necklace he offered to the love of his life, Kana. Understanding that his attitude has already cost him his fiancée, he accepts to teach Katara and tries to make up for his past mistakes. When he realizes that Katara is a prodigy, he actually tasks Katara with helping Aang out. After the siege is over, Pakku gives Katara a vial of spirit water, which is a crucial element for later story beats. That's how you do a side character! He doesn't have to be crazy strong or insanely complicated, and we don't need to know what he eats for breakfast and at what time he goes to bed. We just need enough information and context to care about him, understand where he's coming from, and sufficient screen time so that he can set up story beats down the line. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. But here's the thing, right? I think these things were glanced over not because it would be useless or uninteresting or it would take too much time and they couldn't afford it, but because the writing team had no idea they needed to shift the focus to these events, locations, or people in the first place. This isn't just a bad artistic decision or something that's bugging me personally, this is incompetency on the part of the writers. There, I said it. Don't believe me? Fine. Remember when I said there are things that are just glanced over completely? Well, we need to talk about the ending of the show because it's a fucking mess. I mean, 9.9 out of 10? 9.8 out of 10? I've done my best not to mention this up until now, but I genuinely believe people are averting their gaze and nose from the pile of stinking shit sitting right in front of them for the name of nostalgia and memories they had as a child. Not that, well, this applies to the whole show, but it's still there and we need to talk about it. Azula going batshit mental when the power gets to her is never elaborated upon. It's just assumed that she's going mental because her attitude towards power has driven everyone around her away, but it's because she's being absolutely bonkers that people are leaving in the first place. Not crazy, mind you, because she was always crazy, twisted, and all sorts of fucked up. So why the fuck is she going mental? Oh yeah, no, I remember. It's because her friends betrayed her and she can't trust anyone. Okay, so when her brother betrayed her, nothing happened then? She didn't have a fucking insane mental breakdown? What about when she realized her mother preferred Zuko over her? Did she have an insane mental breakdown? What about when Ty Lee split off before joining the circus? Did she then have an insane mental breakdown? Nothing in the show even points to that, and that's the issue. We have to accept she's going mental because she's paranoid that people will betray her, just like her friends betrayed her, even though it's mentioned several times before that she has already had multiple knives in her back. Could it be because of a reason that's implied yet never told in the show? Because it's too much responsibility on her shoulders? Because she's afraid of not being enough? She never seemed to have issues with that when she failed in the past, and she hasn't even failed when she becomes insane. She's always endured, always persevered, so why now, of all times, must she go insane? For the sake of the plot. Yep, I'll say it and I'll do it again. The Last Airbender has contrivances for the sake of the plot. And this episode in particular is nowhere near a masterpiece of television, even in the realm of kids shows. I will say the White Lotus doing their thing, that was badass. Again, I don't hate this show or even this episode, but man, it is just not that good. The fight scenes are excellent, but it has little to do with storytelling, at least in this episode. Once we get to Korra, I'll go more in depth about this, but you cannot limit yourself to what is presented on screen. If you stop there, you are essentially missing out on a great part of what the show has to offer. You just don't have a full picture when thinking about it. But let's not get hasty. I did mention the very last episode. 9.9 out of 10. It's gotta be absolutely crazy good, right? I mean, with a score like that, it has to be one of the best episodes in television history, right? Wrong, it's fucking ass. It's the final fight against the big bad evil guy, but not only is there absolutely no tension because we have literally never heard of Fire Lord Ozai before this book, there is little to no engagement because he is never humanized throughout the show. I mean, we know who he is and what he does, but we never followed him the way that we followed Azula or Zuko. Yeah, okay, the fight scene is cool and all, and I gotta say that the Avatar state while bending the four elements is straight up badass material, but apart from that, there really is no substance to this. Oh, but it's the fight of good versus evil. It's plenty enough, you might say. Fucking wrong twice. The evil guy never thinks he's evil. He always thinks he is doing the right thing for one reason or another. Ozai believed in, what, conquering the world for himself? Even his predecessor, the fucking dude who started the 100-year war, has a good reason for it. He believed that he was sharing the bountiful culture of the Fire Nation across the world. He wanted to share it with others and therefore help people. It's only along the way that his aspirations got out of control and he became truly evil, when he put his own goals in front of a human life. You could also argue that he was evil from the get-go by virtue of his imperialistic ways, but that's exactly what's cool about Fire Lord Sozin. You can debate and argue both sides, and there's some valid points on both ends. That was done in a single episode. Ozai never, ever had a moment like this in the entire time he was on screen. Like, literally, why the fuck are you doing anything, man? Tell me something. You wanna bring glory to your nation? You want to make your family and your people proud? Your hurt from your own wife leaving you caused you to double down on your imperialistic ways you learned as a child? Fucking tell me something! But it doesn't end here, because his goal throughout book 3 is absolutely moronic garbage. Why the fuck are you planning on destroying and raising the Earth Kingdom if your goal is to conquer the whole world? Wouldn't it be a better plan to attack only the necessary places and people you need to eliminate in order to win the nation over? Burn burning down a shitload of natural resources isn't going to help you in the long run. Why are you spending your time setting the forest on fire, bro? It makes no fucking sense. And why is that? Because the ending was a rushed and messy piece of shit. We never learned any backstory to Fire Lord Ozai, and people are acting like this is the greatest fight in animated television history, even though we know for a fact The Last Airbender relies on the backstory of its characters to tell its story. All of which because the show had some really shitty pacing and the focus was brought to some really uninteresting and unnecessary things during its airing. The absolute worst about all of this, in my opinion, is the fact that these episodes are to me the exact opposite of what the show has been doing for its entire runtime. The Last Airbender is an intelligent show, much more than many of the alternatives in its category, and yet fails to fully deliver on its mission of not taking its audience for morons. Because even as a kid, you can piece what's about to happen from a mile away. He's the ultimate bad dude trademarked. But because it's the very last episode of the show, you know Aang is gonna beat him no matter what, because it's his destiny and he's been training this whole time for this exact moment. You know Sokka is going to destroy those airships, you know the good guys will win in the end. There's this amazing tweet by Fetusberry about a game journalist using cheats to beat Sekiro, and honestly, I've learned a whole lot from it in many aspects of my life. You cheated not only the game, but yourself. You didn't grow, you didn't improve, you took a shortcut and gained nothing. You experienced a hollow victory. Nothing was risked, nothing was gained. It's sad that you don't know the difference. Since then, it's become a pretty famous copypasta, but seriously, it applies just as much to The Last Airbender's finale as it did to Sekiro. Ozai's finale is literally taking the audience for dumbasses, because they expect us to think this is a high-stakes battle, but we all know what's gonna happen. There is no risk, there is nothing to gain because everything is already laid out. Now, you might say that The Last Airbender has this fight because it serves as a catharsis for Aang's struggles. Beating Ozai is representative of overcoming his weakness and becoming a better person from it. To which I have to say, bull fucking shit. Aang fucking breaks his spine and goes into the Avatar state to win it all because of course some fucking horse shit like this had to be the reason he won. No, not because he worked hard. Not because he overcame his fear of confrontation, not because he grew and learned from his friends along his path to this fight. No, because it's his fate to win even though he should essentially be paralyzed from the waist down. His ability was locked out for the whole book and it comes back right at the moment where he needed it the most. And we're supposed to believe this is a strong story beat? Like this is some sort of crazy, insane comeback he's managed? He comes back with basically no damage whatsoever and wait, what? He fucking steals Ozai's bending? Like he yoinked it. For good? Out of nowhere. Okay, you know what? I'm not even gonna get mad at this one. Instead, I'm gonna put it in the bank and use it later on. But I think I've made my point more than enough here. The Last Airbender is far from being this great show a lot of people remember it to be, and the pacing ruined a lot of potentially really great characters. I think it's the same thing with people that have watched One Piece all the way through today. They're so invested in the story that they're willing to overlook glaring storytelling issues and remember only the good parts, which The Last Airbender has plenty of, by the way. I think Zuko's storyline is amazing, I think the Guru and Crossroads of Destiny are some of this show's greatest episodes, and I think Aang's training is an amazing plot device. I've spent enough time shitting on The Last Airbender, and I think I've said everything I've wanted to say about it. So let's move on to what I believe is a criminally underrated cartoon, which has been bashed unjustly by many YouTubers and many people over the internet because they misunderstood or didn't quite catch how that show differed from its predecessor. Of course, I'm talking about
Earth, Fire, Air, Water. Only the Avatar can master all four elements and bring balance to the world.
Boy, oh boy, would you look at the time. It's hot take o'clock. Honestly, The Legend of Korra is a really great show. A really great show with some flaws, but a really great show nonetheless. I'll be going over why a lot of people didn't appreciate it, what makes it so good in my opinion, and its flaws after that. Alright, here we go. Contrary to popular belief, Legend of Korra has some of the best storytelling I have ever seen in a kids show. Being a sequel to The Last Airbender, you expect to see a similar level of dedication to the craft, and it's entirely there. The show doesn't take its audience for a bunch of morons, it touches on really dark fucking themes that genuinely surprised me with how they were presented, and it has what I consider to be great pacing. That last part is probably one of the most contentious points, with some people absolutely loving it and some people absolutely hating it. I, for one, fall in a third category of people who were worried at first about the quick pacing of the show but ultimately came around and understood why it was so good. Here, let me give you a quick example. Take the events of the first episode of Book 1, Welcome to Republic City. Within the first minute of Legend of Korra, we are exposed to the events of the previous show, followed by the impacts of the events of the previous show, which takes the form of Republic City. Then there's the intro sequence, and then bam, South Pole. We see the parents of the Avatar having some real issues keeping her contained, and she's already capable of bending every element but air. Jump to like 15 years later and goddamned Katara admits Korra is strong when seeing her bend fire. Korra shows interest in bending air, and then we get introduced to Naga. We then get introduced to Tenzin and his family, the only airbenders in the world. We get a super good scene where Jinora asks Katara about the events of the previous show, only to be interrupted by Ikki, who is a fucking ADHD mess. We'll get back to why it's so good much later. A lot of people mistook it as the writers telling the audience they were putting The Last Airbender behind them. Tenzin then says he can't train the Avatar, and Korra proposes to go to Republic City. The White Lotus says no, and Korra says screw you and goes anyway. She gets to Republic City, and we learn the world has changed drastically since the last time we left off. There are now cars, street vendors, airships are pretty common, electricity is essentially everywhere, megaphones. Speaking of megaphones, this dude is parading in a park telling people that non-benders are lower class citizens and that it's time to rise up. Korra disagrees and she gets booed off. We then see the Triads show up to a store and extort some money, and Korra comes through and fucks their shit up. Yeah, it's awesome, and yeah, she's doing her job as the Avatar, but we also learn metal bending is quite common now, and that there's policemen doing their jobs, and she needs to be under arrest because she wrecked the fucking place. She gets caught by a blimp, is arrested, and meets Lin Beifong, daughter of Toph and chief of police in Republic City. She learns it's not her job anymore to go around fucking people up, and that the police are there to keep order, not the Avatar. Tenzin bails her out, and Korra pleads with Tenzin to learn airbending. He says yes, and they get back to the Air Island. The Avatar is then forced in front of a press conference, and a lot of good questions are brought up. She responds with the most politically friendly thing ever, aka mentioning Aang and his goal for the city and how she wants to help. Cut to Amon's underlings listening menacingly, and then bam, credits. What I want to illustrate is this show is really fucking fast when it wants to. It doesn't beat around the bush. It brings you on a journey, and if you're not ready, you might genuinely miss some stuff out. The very next episode, Korra becomes a pro-bender after Tenzin tells her no. She can't get a grip on airbending movement stances and burns a 2,000-year-old artifact because she's enraged. Even when she is in the wrong, she refuses to acknowledge it and presses forward. She then catches onto Tenzin's teachings during the match and gets the hang of those movements Tenzin has been drilling her with. This is an episode later. I'm not kidding when I say it's fast. It really does not have a choice. Each season is almost half as long as the ones in The Last Airbender. By episode 7, there are fucking mecha suits. Azami's dad is revealed to be a villain and a genius. He invented the automobile, the mech suit, and by episode 11, he also invented the fucking airplane. I'm not kidding, this is honestly a wild ride. It changes the power dynamics and the implications for the whole world, not just Republic City and the Avatar crew. Our entire understanding of the Avatar world is thrown out of the window and replaced with something that's so advanced that it's essentially new altogether, and that's fine. I think it could have been approached in better ways, and I'll go in depth about that later on, but for now, know this. This isn't Avatar The Last Airbender. It's from the same world as The Last Airbender, but it's a totally different point in time. A lot, and I mean a lot of people take issue with the pace at which progress is shown in the whole series. but here's why that's actually a good thing. The first and most obvious reason is that it is coherent within the world. A lot of people like to say otherwise, but really, it's not coherent? Dude, the last Airbender had blimps and ships and coal power already thanks to the Fire Nation. They have tanks and massive drills and railway systems. It's absolutely not crazy to think that after the four nations were in quote-unquote harmony thanks to the events that took place in the last Airbender, the world saw a great period of peace and prosperity where the way the world operated changed drastically. Seeing as though the exact same thing happened to us with way less fortunate conditions with the Industrial Revolution, I think it's perfectly fair to assume the world went through a similar period when Aang was around. I mean, do people even know how much was initially created out of what was essentially thin air and dreams during the Industrial Revolution? The locomotive, the telegraph, dynamite, the photograph, the typewriter, the fucking electric generator, the internal combustion engine? All of these things have completely reshaped how the world functioned and looked, and how we as people formed culture around them. The world of Legend of Korra is perfectly believable, and I really don't understand the people who hate it, apart from it being just a general aesthetic dislike towards the things that are shown, or them being so wildly different from the last Airbender that they can't relate to Legend of Korra the same way. Also, I should add that this pacing making sense within the world is a good thing. It allows us to better understand the world and it becomes overall more coherent for the audience. The second is that the show doesn't hold your hand. It assumes you're smart enough to understand what's going on, or at least to try to figure it out. It's show, don't tell in action. All I've told you so far about the world of Korra is something I got because I looked at what the creators were putting on screen thanks to the animators. They learned something very valuable while making The Last Airbender, and it's that backstories and setups are great for conveying information about the story easily, but the length it takes to do so is not worth the additional ease of access to what is going on. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and the creators finally realized it, which I'm glad for. To demonstrate this, I would like to go over what many people consider to be the worst villain in the Avatar franchise, Unalaq, and explain why he is a better villain than Firelord Ozai. I know the bar really isn't high here, but trust me, he's probably way better than you think he is. Before I do this, however, I really want to make something clear before anything else. The Legend of Korra has great characters, and I'm tired of pretending they're not. The writing for each of them is honestly phenomenal for a kids show, and I believe it's disingenuous to say that the writers and creators don't know what they're doing with them, or that the story they are putting forward makes no sense at all. I obviously won't go into detail for each and every character because that would be extremely long and tedious, so instead I want to go over who I genuinely think the best character in the whole show is. Iknik Blackstone Varrick. I have rarely seen a character so complete and compelling. Every time he's on screen, you know you're in for a good time. It all starts with the first episode of Book 2, Rebel Spirit. Azami wants to save her company from bankruptcy and therefore seeks the aid of one of the most powerful men in the world, Jeffrey Bezos. Of course, it's not actually Jeffrey Bezos, but come on. One of the richest men in the world, and he controls the entire global shipping business. Anyway, we get to a meeting with them and we can immediately see that he's a special cookie. Bolin calls him out on, well, not levitating, and you immediately think he would get mad. Because the trope of the rich, kooky billionaire is that they're usually hyper-eccentric, and if you cross them, they get mad at you for shattering their illusion of grandeur. And they really lead you on to believe that's what's gonna happen. Except Varrick does a complete 180 and befriends Bolin instead, because...
I like you, kid. You're a real straight shooter, just like me.
He then proceeds to invent the moving picture, and then you're like, huh, I guess this guy is another genius amongst geniuses. So your perception of him changes again, except he's unsatisfied with that and immediately says it's garbage right after. He then proceeds to call Ginger to strike some poses while looking absolutely uninterested in her, and then immediately goes back to being absolutely interested in the potential of his movers. Azami tries to bring up her company and a potential deal, and Varrick does this.
If we could hammer out a deal.
Stop. Look me in the eye. We got a deal!
Then he goes right back to being a real eccentric trophy billionaire. Do you have any idea how fucking incredibly hard it is to build a character that is not limited by their own devices, all while being coherent about it? Take any other character in the show, even the most chaotic ones of the bunch, and they still have limitations. Of course, Varric has some too, but they're so little that he can essentially squeeze anywhere and do his thing, and it makes sense. I could never imagine Korra trying to serve street food to a random passerby, but Varric. There isn't a single situation in the show I can think of where Varric wouldn't be a welcome addition. When I say this guy can do anything, I'm not the only one who thinks this. The writers clearly had this in mind while designing his character. Throughout Season 2, Varric's doing some wacky shenanigans and you don't really overthink it until episode 9, The Guide. All of these shenanigans, they actually build up to something. What you think is a comic relief character actually becomes a big player in the storyline because he's trying to manipulate the leader of Republic City and the Team Avatar into joining the war against the Northern Water Tribe so that his own ships may continue their trade. So he helps Team Avatar and then works against them the very next moment. It must mean that he's a traitor and therefore a bad guy, right? Wrong. Varric is actually a good guy, but his interests don't match with the ones of Team Avatar. The last Airbender was praised for his nuance of good and evil, and it is still fully present here. The next season, he comes back as the head of the technology department in Zaofu, the Metal City. When the team is met with a conspiracy but no actual evidence, Varric comes to the rescue and confirms that this is most likely a plan to thwart Korra and her friends. His explanation? He did the exact same thing in the past. Hard to argue against that. In Season 4, he becomes an advisor and technology developer to Kuvira, only to have his moral compass go off and tell her to fuck off. He puts his life on the line for the sake of good. He's 100% ready to die for what he believes is right. He's easygoing, slick, innovative, charismatic, and most importantly, chaotic. I do not understand why people think the characters in Korra suck. If the writers are able to come up with something as crazy good and difficult to pull off as Varric, I think it's only fair to say that they actually may have some amount of merit and ability when it comes to character building. This, in my opinion, is one of these show's greatest strengths. Every character, even what people consider to be throwaway villains, are actually genuinely some amazing characters. They go through hardships and difficult stretches, they have reasons and motives behind their actions. Which brings me to Unalaq, and also Season 2 as a whole, which I think is much better than people give it credit for. The first mistake people make when thinking of Unalaq is that his opposite, character-wise, is supposed to be Korra. Up until this point, Avatar has always had a pretty straightforward villain versus hero structure. In Book 1 of The Legend of Korra, Amon is the opposite of Korra because she has all of the elements and wants to balance between them, but Amon has quote-unquote none and wants benders to lose their powers. In Book 3 of The Last Airbender, Aang fights Fire Lord Ozai, his opposite, because he wants only a single nation in the world, whereas Aang wants all four to live in harmony. In Book 2, Aang and the gang fight against the Dai Li, and it repeats once again. The Dai Li wants to normalize thought and behavior such that it is predictable and easily controllable, whereas the Avatar fights for individual freedom and the right to manifest your own destiny. In Book 1, they fight against Zhao, who completely disregards the importance of spirits, and it's the Avatar's job to keep balance between the spirits and the humans. So people clearly like this formula because it's been working for so long, but the story of The Legend of Korra is not about the Avatar. I'll go over this a bit later, but the importance of the Avatar in the world is being reduced to a bare minimum, so that's also shown in the cinematography. So what can the writers do instead? Of course, they'll set up a bad guy for Korra to defeat at the end, but it doesn't mean it's her bad guy. I want to use the Dungeons and Dragons alignment system to explain what Season 2 is really all about, and why Unalaq is secretly a genius villain. If you've been on the internet long enough, you've probably seen the alignment chart somewhere before. We got good, neutral, and evil, followed by lawful, neutral, and chaotic. I don't think good and evil have to be explained, but think of it this way. Good is fertile, evil is arid. People that act good are people that want to see things go on and lead to other things. People that act evil are people that, for whatever reason, believe something must end. Neutral individuals are people that sit outside of this dichotomy, believing in neither one of these concepts. Lawfulness is not only sticking to a personal code, it's the belief that there should be order in the world. There should be civilization, someone in charge, a general code of conduct for everyone. Chaotic individuals believe that things are better off left to their own devices. They believe the structure of order is often, if not always, exploited and therefore denatured. A neutral individual would be someone that does not believe in either the power of structure or chaos. They don't want to deal with either of them because things are always gray in both cases. With this in mind, I can safely say that Unalaq is a lawfully evil character. He believes in setting up a structure, a code of conduct, and having someone in charge. However, to do this, he must put the duality of the water tribes to an end. This would place him in the bottom left corner of the alignment chart. As for Korra, I think it's safe to say that she is ultimately a chaotic good character. She doesn't believe in the power of structure and would rather be left to her own devices to deal with the problems around her. But she fights for things to keep existing and not be wiped out. So that puts her in the top right corner and... wait, what the fuck? She's Unalaq opposite. Did you just contradict yourself? It's clearly the bad guy she has to fight. I mean, she literally fights him at the end of the season. How could he possibly be anyone else's enemy? Well, remember that one amazing character in the show? The one that can squeeze in any situation? A certain chaotic, flexible, ingenious man with the power of money? Varric is the enemy of Unalaq, just as Unalaq is the enemy of Varric. Varric is chaotic good, just like Korra, except that he's also a selfish prick at times and fights for his own good. He's from the Southern Water Tribe, whereas Unalaq is from the Northern Water Tribe. But beyond that, Varric and Unalaq are both sides of the same coin. Varric dedicates his effort to a cause, whereas Unalaq dedicates his efforts toward himself, but both are trying to stir trouble. Varric goes ahead and exploits the structure of order by manipulating people into joining and sympathizing for the Southern Water Tribe. He does so because he wants to see it keep existing, but in the process he causes a whole lot of trouble. Unalaq wants to unify the water tribes and then unify the world with him at the helm, because he knows that if he throws the world into chaos, he has the ability to re-establish order and move humanity and spirits to a better place. He literally has the ability to establish order by pacifying the spirits. I mean, come on. His goal is to become the most powerful person in the world, but there's a genuinely reasonable answer behind the question as to why he would want that position in the first place. He causes trouble because he genuinely believes he can drive humanity into a new era. However, that does not mean Unalaq is a character that has a good alignment. To arrive at this goal, he wants to destroy a whole bunch of shit, even going as far as to eliminate the seal of the literal embodiment of chaos. That means that Korra, even though she doesn't necessarily have a bone to pick with either of these guys, understands both of their positions and brings balance to them by beating the fuck out of Unalaq, which is her literal job as the Avatar. Which brings me to the actual goal for the plot of Season 2, which is to demonstrate that being lawful does not automatically equate to being good. Being chaotic does not automatically equal to being evil, and that if you are not in harmony with these beliefs, they will warp and crush your being to force you in harmony with them. That's literally what happens to Unalaq. He frees the spirit of chaos to bring lawfulness to the world, but gets absolutely butt-fucked the moment they fuse together because Unalaq is not in harmony with chaos. He just doesn't understand it, displayed by the fact that he doesn't want anyone around him he can't control. Despite Korra being chaotic, she is fused with the spirit of order, aka lawfulness. But when this link between her and Rava gets severed, she's still able to replicate it because she understands what it means to be lawful, even though she herself does not align with that point of view. Because of her good nature that wishes for things to keep existing, she's in harmony with it, displayed by the fact that she did help Unalaq before she realized he was evil. That's why the fucking big boy fight at the end of Season 2 is honestly great. Because it's not a regular fight of good versus evil, with people getting their powers out of nowhere. It's the fight of law versus chaos, and how within law there is both good, evil, and chaos, and within chaos there is both good, evil, and law. The job of the Avatar, therefore, is not only to bring balance to good and evil, but also law and chaos. That is such a massive step forward storytelling-wise. It's fucking genius on part of the writers because it opens up so many doors to them while still being coherent and dishing out a great message in the process. It proves the legend of Korra never left behind what the last Airbender put forward in terms of theme exploration. Unalaq has a great motive, Varric has a great motive, Korra has a great motive. The themes that are touched on are great and extremely deep. So why did people fucking hate this season? No, I mean seriously, the amount of people bashing this specific season is out of this world. Korra is apparently a Mary Sue with plot armor, massive contrivances going for her, and a badly written villain to boot. To these people, I have only one thing to say. Are you seriously that fucking stupid that the only way you can learn things about the show is if they're told to you? You really need Korra explaining in depth why the fuck she's doing every single fucking thing she does? Are you out of your goddamned minds? I mentioned beforehand how the show does not hold your hand, and I realize this might seem off course, but I'm still making a point about pacing here, but bear with me, we're getting there. The Legend of Korra understands something the last Airbender wasn't entirely sure of. They have multiple audiences. They got a younger one, and they got an older one. Season 2 is a testament to understanding this dichotomy when it comes to the audience, because it's the beginning of a trend which continued throughout the show. The dialogue is for the younger audience, whereas the visuals are for the older audience. Show, don't tell. One of cinema's most popular, most efficient rule of thumb is in full action within this show. Don't believe me once again? Fine, let's do it. In episode 8 of the first book, we have an interaction between the characters of Korra and Tarlok, which is just fucking ridiculous because it repeats a bunch of shit we already know. We've seen Korra struggle with airbending. We know Tarlok is reckless and won't stop even if the Avatar isn't there. Actually, we also know Tarlok doesn't even need the Avatar to begin with because we've seen them in action and the Avatar didn't really provide an overwhelming amount of support to the task force. They just don't rely on her. I think the writers figured that out and essentially did a full 180 for the season right after. They don't have that much time to begin with, so the more story they can tell, the better. Right on episode 1, Unalaq is faced with a dark spirit and he pacifies it with his spiritual waterbending. Fast forward to episode 5, where Korra is faced with a dark spirit in the middle of the sea. She attempts to recreate what Unalaq did, but fails. Now, here's a quick question. Where the fuck did she learn that? Oh right, yeah, fucking Unalaq, because Korra is right there when he does his thing. And this is a trend that's very, very common in Korra, but also Avatar altogether. It's just that the last Airbender did this through massive training episodes and... Wait, what? You mean Aang learns firebending in the span of 6 minutes after meeting Zhong? Look, we can pretend like having those training episodes is sick and everything, but there is little to no build-up in most of the training episodes in The Last Airbender. Yeah, a training episode might encapsulate like a week or two of training in the world, but there is no tension to resolve. You know it's going to go smoothly, and that's it. You have nothing to look forward to. Nothing was lost, nothing was gained. The Legend of Korra even acknowledges how important training arcs are, and it has a much better one with Korra and her airbending. People think again that she's a Mary Sue for getting her airbending powers after Amon yoinks him, but they fail to realize it's actually the most logical outcome for the character of Korra. User Doomman84 made this great point which I'll piggyback off of, but even I didn't think about it that hard and came to understand it later on when Zahir showed up. Essentially, airbending is the peak definition of freedom in the world of Avatar. They can fly, they can travel, they can interact with spirits, all that good shit. Now, if you think about it, Korra has always been the Avatar. Ever since she could bend 2 elements, it was over for her life as a regular kid. She was stuck in that framework and couldn't get out of it. The fucking moment Amon takes Korra's bending away is the moment where she is the most free, because she isn't the Avatar anymore. All the pressure that was put on her, grounding her, was lifted off and she could finally feel free, something she never could have done otherwise. It makes perfect sense! Why are you bashing her, you absolute fucking lunatic mongrel? Ugh, anyway, Korra is able to mimic shit that's shown to her. Aang showed the same prowess with his masters. Big deal, right? Who cares? Well, I fucking care because it explains every single moment where people think she's being a Mary Sue. It's literally the key to understanding why she's able to get her powers, man. If you don't pay attention to what's on screen and you don't give the show the possibility of merit for at least a split second, you're missing out on a bunch of shit the show has to offer you. Why could Korra become a big-ass spirit and fight Unalaq at the end of season 2? Because she saw how Vaatu warped Unalaq's being and figured out that she could project her spirit in a similar way. If Unalaq, a deeply spiritual being, was able to harbor enough energy for Vaatu to do that shit, Korra, who is the literal Avatar, has plenty enough energy herself to do the thing. Episode 11 Season 3. How the fuck did they contact Sue if they don't have a radio on the airship? Well, Lynn has a radio on her Jeep and talked to some dude in Republic City with it. It's only fair to say that it could most likely reach the Metal City. The visual storytelling in The Legend of Korra is out there with some of the best examples in children's cartoons. The pace becomes more than fine once you fucking realize that, because all of these story beats you think are missing are actually there, you just haven't been paying attention. Episode 10 of Season 2, A New Spiritual Age, is by far the easiest example out of the bunch to highlight this, because it really cranks it up to 11. Korra and Jinora got through to the spirit world. They get sucked into a big-ass ocean after Korra can't handle her bad vibes. They get eaten by a monster and are shown spiraling deeper in an abyss. Korra gets separated from Jinora and falls, well, literally in an abyss. She hits the ground of a forest all alone with dark spirits hunting her. She has no powers, no comprehension of the world around her, and no waypoints to aim for. So she calls out to Jinora, and we see her transformed as a child, crying alone in the woods. Jinora does essentially the same thing and finds her friend Furryfoot. Cut back to Korra, who gets scared by what appears to be a really dangerous looking dark spirit but is actually a small bird. She broke its wing. Damn. Iroh shows up with a lantern and guides Korra out of the forest. He's hosting a party for a wedding. Sick. He talks about a teapot for a while. That's kinda weird. Jinora's off to the library to find a map out of here. Iroh plays Pai Sho and Korra's sad because she lost her friend. Iroh tries to comfort her and Korra freaks out. The spirits becomes angry because she's angry, and Iroh tells us about some shenanigans with her powers. Iroh calms her down and Korra is surprised the sun comes back, and Iroh sends Korra on a quest to help the bird. Sick. Jinora finds a book and boom, exposition about Vaatu as to why he's the big bad evil kite, but he's imprisoned in a big tree, so that's fine. Unalaq shows up and takes Jinora away. Korra sets off in the mountains to bring the bird back to its home. She's attacked by 3 dark spirits with the power of light inside. They become nice and cool. They even bring her to the bird's home at the top of the mountain and it regenerates like a phoenix. Then the bird brings her to Vaatu, then they talk, then Unalaq's being a bitch and is holding Jinora captive. Korra is forced to open the second portal. Unalaq almost fucks her shit up, but the bird comes back to save her. Thank you plot for bending to her needs, and Jinora is held captive. Essentially, end of episode, roll credits, garbage out of 10. This is the kind of shit I hear all the time when looking at negative reviews of Korra. It takes the superficial layer of dialogue and cool moments on screen and gives it no credit whatsoever, bashes it and deconstructs it without offering anything in return. But because I'm a nice person and I don't like to spit on other people's work without a valid reason, let me now explain why this episode is actually really amazing. We begin with Korra and Jinora finally being able to travel to the spirit world through meditation. Korra was never a spiritual gal, but she really trusts Jinora, and Jinora proves to be fairly talented when it comes to the spiritual side of things. Korra, however, has no idea how to behave with the spirits and has previously never had a positive experience with them. She's therefore very aggressive with them and tries to control her surroundings like she would normally in the material world. Because she's incomplete and tries to take on a task that's bigger than her abilities, she's thrown into an ocean, the symbol of chaos and potential. But within chaos and potential, there are threats that want to thwart you. Korra and Jinora get eaten by one of these monsters and spiral downward to their own despair. Korra has it especially bad and falls into the abyss, the darkest, lowest, furthest point from what she knows. You would think the forest is another area completely, but the visuals show us that the abyss becomes the forest. The forest is just a more tangible manifestation of the abyss. She panics and becomes uneasy with the world around her. It's no coincidence that the abyss also symbolizes the uncertainty of childhood, as Korra essentially loses her aim. She doesn't know what to do or where to go. In that uncertainty, she ends up hurting others, and that's when she realizes something is wrong. Behold, however, a light in the dark. A lighthouse in the abyss of the ocean. The man we know for going to the abyss several times, for losing everything and rebuilding everything and losing it once again. The Wanderer picks up the lost avatar and brings her towards light and peace, good and lawfulness. He talks about the teapot of Avatar 1, who went through a process Iroh thinks Korra could learn a lot from, which is falling into an abyss and shifting his view from chaotic good to lawful good. However, Korra is a different person altogether, and her lack of critical information makes it so that she is not ready to undertake such a process. It takes a long time for one to shift his view, so Korra can't rearrange her entire frame of reference for the world in less than a day. That would make Korra a Mary Sue, which she is not. Korra instead defaults to her aggressive and negative perspective. However, Iroh has seen and been through way worse, so it doesn't affect him. Remember how Zuko used to be a piece of shit to him and he always loved him? Iroh then informs Korra of the information she was lacking, realizing how little she actually understands. It's not far-fetched to think Iroh believed Korra had similar abilities to Aang, since the whole reincarnation thing isn't even clear to the Avatar itself. Iroh shares some profound wisdom he's gained through his hardships, especially the one with his own son and nephew. He understands that he can't force Korra to change, but he can help her to better herself. He therefore puts a challenge in her hands to test out her newly acquired knowledge about the world. She needs to climb the tallest peak, the tallest challenge, the opposite of the abyss, in order to make up for what she did in the abyss. She needs to understand what makes good, good, to ensure things go on and lead to other things. Fertility. She then does something she's never done in the show before because it's the total opposite of her own mode of being. She passively disarms a situation without creating a fight, something she's shown before to really not be that great at. Once she understands the opposite position, the ride to the top is easy and good comes in full force. The bird flourishes to be an accomplished version of itself, and Korra becomes a grown woman once again, in unison with the bird spirit. When the bird comes to save her, it's not the plot bending itself in half to help Korra, it's because good leads to good. Things lead to other things. That's the spirit of good. It all makes perfect sense if you give the show the possibility of presenting something to you that's worthwhile. Being arrogant and calling a show trash without even properly watching it is just like a child not wanting to taste something because it looks gross. How do you know you like it if you're not even open to the possibility of liking it in the first place? The show only tells you what you need to know to get to the action or to get the general idea of the story. The talking's for the kids, the visuals are for the adults because the kids don't give a shit about story beats and coherency and fertility and whatever else. A lot is left unsaid yet is shown to the spectator, and it's your job to piece it together. When Tenzin says,
What's the matter? You can't handle it, soldier?
the line work changes to be more rigid and thick, meaning Tenzin isn't being his usual self because he isn't a rigid and thick person. The role of the talking is to make evident what the visuals are showing, because whether you want it or not, this is still a show aimed towards a younger audience, and these things may not be clear to them yet. I personally think it is a good decision on the creator's part, but we'll talk later about what went wrong with it. All of this to say, the pacing in Legend of Korra is not only good insofar as it allows the creators to be more direct with their story and wider with their target audience, it's also not wrong, which as I understand it are two completely different things. It's like eating a salad. Not only is it good for your health, but it's also not wrong to eat some. Imagine for a second that eating babies was good for your skin. That wouldn't make it right. But for Korra, not only is the pacing good, but it's also correct, which is something that's really fucking hard to do in any film, series, or media in general. It's just that many story beats are actually happening in visual form. Well, we got the pace of Korra covered. Now onto the second thing a lot of people dislike about The Legend of Korra, the story. Because yeah, it can be well paced all at once. If the story sucks ass, it's really not much of a masterpiece. To which I have to say, actually fair. That's a perfectly valid assessment. However, I would like to ask, what exactly do you think makes up a bad story? Because yeah, I can agree that a well-paced story that sucks is not worth much, but if we don't know what a bad story is in the first place, we can't really say that Korra is a bad show. The issue with defining a bad story, however, is that you can dance around and name 1,000 things that characterizes a bad story without actually defining what a bad story is. You can say a bad story is a boring story, you can say a bad story is a predictable story, you can even say that a bad story is a story that's poorly written, though it doesn't really mean much. But you can see the issue here. None of these answers actually explain what a bad story is. They all try to convince you there is something wrong with the medium, such that if the story was told some way else, it would actually hold something of value. I think this falls really short. So what exactly do I think is a bad story? Do I even know what a bad story is? Well, no, but actually yes. I think I have a sufficient definition that's able to define what a bad story is. A bad story is a story that is unable to highlight some part of our reality. A good story, therefore, is a story that is able to highlight some part of our reality. It doesn't have to be your particular reality, and most often this is the reason why people listen to video essays and reviews in the first place. They want to know what part of their reality hasn't been highlighted yet, because there might be something to gain from doing so. Usually information, to be honest. With that in mind, I want to quell the doubts of people who think that The Legend of Korra doesn't have a good story, that it's unable to highlight anything in your life. If you haven't watched the show yet but are watching this video anyway, or if you have seen the show before but haven't thought it had anything valuable to teach you, then you especially should watch the next part of this video if spoilers do not turn you down from watching something. Because I'm going to tell you exactly what Korra is all about and show you the proof to back it up in such a way that you might enjoy watching it more because you will have a clear head. Alright, let's do this. For those of you who have seen Interstellar by Christopher Nolan, you will most likely be aware of Murphy's Law, but for those of you who haven't, here's what it states. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. It's not meant to be taken seriously, like not everything will always go wrong. It's more so a preemptive measure to make you think about the possible negative outcomes of a situation. Of course, this is more of a theory than anything else, but I think it's a good gateway into what I consider to be Korra's thought experiment. Yes, The Legend of Korra is actually one big thought experiment, and we've been fooled into thinking it was simply the follow-up to The Last Airbender. The Legend of Korra asks a simple question. What would happen to the dedicated protector of humanity if the worst possible scenario occurred to them? As I don't think Murphy's Law truly represents the situation the Avatar is put in, I went ahead and scoured around the internet until I could find something sufficiently reasonable to name this thought experiment properly. And I believe I found something that fits just right. The Legend of Korra is Avatar meets force majeure. It's a term used in the French legal system to describe what is named an act of God, aka circumstances that are so unlucky and out of your control that only God could have come up with it. Or at least this is what they use it for in the legal system, but we're here talking about storytelling, so I'll go ahead and tell you a story of my own. I heard this back a long time ago, and I have absolutely no idea if it is even accurate, so please correct me in the comments if I am wrong. Force majeure is a very old concept and dates back at least a few hundred years back. However, during World War II, the French general Charles de Gaulle described his plan against the Germans in a very particular manner to the handful of people who were willing to listen to it. I believe it was during the nonconformist meeting held by Émile Maillet, who was introduced to de Gaulle by Lucien Nachin. He said something along the lines of, "We cannot wait behind defenses and hope to cover all our bases. We must instead prepare for a case of force majeure." As history knows it, he was right, because the Maginot Line and the plan associated with it failed completely. What he meant by force majeure, in my opinion, is completely different from how the legal system perceives it today. It's what we could call the worst timeline nowadays. Everything which can go wrong must have gone wrong, otherwise we cannot call it a case of force majeure. Whereas Murphy's Law claims to know what will happen in the future, force majeure is instead the opposite. It's looking at the past and going, yeah, this could not have gone possibly worse than it did. And this, my friends, is exactly what happens to Korra in her show. Once you start seeing the show in the light of a force majeure event, it becomes much better, and the story genuinely becomes something that everyone can learn something from. I personally like to think it becomes less accessible but much more enjoyable. Remember this, we'll be going over this again. I highly recommend you to watch or rewatch this show with this in mind while you're looking at it. At the end of it all, the worst possible scenario will have been displayed to the audience, and I think it explains why some people thought this show was utter garbage before its end goal was revealed. But I think it's a real display of ingenuity to be able to trick that many people into thinking your story is fucking terrible, only to pull off some of the most amazing shit a kids show has done in recent history. So if you haven't seen it that way yet, feel free to quit the video, watch it, and come back at this point later on. I'll wait for you, don't worry. Alright, think about it. Everything people thought was horrendous with the show turns out to be a piece of that grand plan to put the Avatar in the worst possible position she could be in. Korra being super strong from the get-go in Book 1 is only a setup to make her fall from grace. Her idea of what an Avatar should be gets absolutely crushed when she gets to Republic City. And at that point, she realizes the world doesn't really need her all that much. Amon is wreaking havoc and there is little she can do because they're essentially decentralized and know what type of of person Korra is, whereas Korra is naive and doesn't understand the position she's in right away, shown by Amon making Korra look absolutely ridiculous. Twice. She loses her bending, she can't keep her man, she ends up hurting the people around her. Not only that, but she doesn't quite know how to make it up to them. And when she ends up fighting Amon, she doesn't even win by her own conscious decision, but by the byproduct of that unconscious block lifted off of her mind, like I explained earlier. She's able to beat Amon not because he wasn't stronger, smarter, or better than her, but because of a variable that was totally unaccounted for by both of them: Korra's ability to master airbending. It's a total fluke. Not a contrivance, mind you. Not the plot bending to her will, not her being a Mary Sue, but a fluke. And she knows this. It's why she turns Mako away and goes off to cry alone. For a whole season, the story isn't about Korra beating Amon and saving the day, it's about her becoming disillusioned with her status as Avatar. She fucked up everything because her situation doesn't need her. And then, foreshadowing. Aang shows up and says this:
"When we hit our lowest point, we are open to the greatest change."
And that is the trigger for her becoming more spiritual. I mean, it's Aang that says it. It's gotta be true, right? Fucking wrong once again. It's Aang's spirit through the Avatar state that says it. It's every other Avatar before him, and that's exactly what happens every single time to every Avatar we know who's quote-unquote unlocked the Avatar state, or at least when they first showed it on screen. Roku got it because he was betrayed by his closest friend, Kyoshi got it because of a tyrant that was about to take over her village, Aang used it to save his own life when he crashed into the ocean. The Avatar state is said to be a survival mechanism, but it's not only a survival mechanism, it's much greater than that. People were mad that Korra got her bending back out of seemingly nowhere, but really, fucking really, her entire vision and comprehension of what an Avatar should be and should do has been completely destroyed. She caused more harm than good and has no idea where to go. She hits her lowest point and the Avatar state kicks in, which by the way is the fucking totality of every Avatar that's ever existed, and you're surprised they can restore her bending? It's a fucking defense mechanism. Of course it's gonna restore her bending, her chakras are all types of fucked up, and the previous Avatars know it. Plus, this is the first time we see Korra ever enter the Avatar state to begin with, and you think it's a fucking contrivance? Are you out of your goddamn mind? An entire season has been building up to this, and people will still find a way to shit on that specific moment because it apparently doesn't make any sense, although it's perfectly reasonable to believe she's hit her lowest point and is able to finally connect with the past Avatars properly. You know what? Fine, I'll use the ticket I put in the bank. If Aang can pull that fucking Avatar state shit out of his ass like he did in season 4 of the show, and people think it's perfectly fine, then this is also perfectly fine because they have the same purpose. The appearance of the Avatar state is a story beat that's used to move the story forward. We either like both or dislike both. Either way, I'm fine with it. We then get to book 2, where I think a lot of people can benefit from seeing it as a case of force majeure. The first episode of season 2 is the moment where I really started to think about it as a case of force majeure myself, because even though we got a whole 12 episode build up to make Korra be able to have her Avatar state, and she knows how well she's been able to connect with its powers and shit, she's still absolutely fucking useless when it comes to the spiritual part. She gets her fucking ass kicked the moment she tries to fight at full power with the Avatar state. She opens the spirit portal, which makes Unalaq go from 0 to 100 real quick, and she essentially unleashes a civil war between the water tribes. It's also shown that Korra has no idea what the image of an Avatar should be to the general public. She fucks up once again, and Jinora is stuck in the spirit world, which deeply hurts Tenzin. Even when they try to fight back against Unalaq, they fail and get captured, and she puts everyone around her in danger. Because of which, she doesn't have enough time to stop the harmonic convergence and fucks up yet another time. She then tries to take on the literal spirit of chaos and fails and lets Unalaq go rampant. She loses her connection to Rava, and her connection to the previous avatars gets obliterated. Korra is only capable of defeating Unalaq by mimicking him, making him the second villain she's unable to defeat by her own devices. Which brings me to another thing I noticed about season 2, which is that Korra is only valued for her abilities, not her status or person. But she's not the only one with that level of ability around, so she's not even seen as the strongest bender ever. I really think the name spirit bending is stupid, but let's roll with it. She's not even the only person who's able to spirit bend. She learned it from Unalaq. She can't airbend as well as Tenzin, she can't waterbend like Katara, she can't earthbend as well as Bolin, she can't firebend as well as Mako, she can't impose authority like Lin, she can't lead like her father, she can't do smart shit like Azami, she can't even be a public personality like Bolin once again, she can't be as spiritual as Jinora, she can't be as tempered as Iroh, she can't command like General Iroh. She's a second-rate avatar, but she's also a second-rate character in that season, and it shows in the cinematography. Korra is barely on screen, and the story beats actually come from around her, not herself. Who comes up with the rebellion? Korra's dad. Who tries to figure out the person behind the recent attacks in Republic City? Mako. Who's trying to get additional forces to help the Southern Water Tribe? Varric. There are whole episodes where Korra is literally just not on screen or barely has any screen time. The Sting, episode 6 of book 2, is a great example of this. It's mainly about the tension between Bolin and his brother, and about Mako and Azami trying to figure out who's behind the bombings. We only see Korra at the very end of the episode, washed ashore. Followed up by this are the 2 amazing episodes about the first Avatar, which explains the whole shebang with Rava and Vaatu, harmonic convergence, all that stuff. In the other episodes, I find it pretty insane how much time is spent on the people around Korra rather than Korra herself, especially because it's literally a show about her. So why is that? Because Korra is realizing what her place in the world is. I did say I'll be explaining later on why The Legend of Korra isn't a story that's strictly about the Avatar, and here we are, I guess. The narrative isn't focused on the Avatar anymore because her situation doesn't demand anything from her other than use her power when other people need it. It's hollow and has little to no meaning, showing how far detached the world is from the Avatar and its mission in the world. The whole goal of the Avatar is to bring balance and justice to the world, and this season is about competent individuals fighting for good, evil, law, and chaos. However, just like in season 1, she learns something from falling deeper than she thought she ever could, that the Avatar is the prime individual to incorporate all of those viewpoints into a single, unified perspective. Even if Korra is chaotic, she understands the purpose of lawfulness. Order, if you will. Even if she's a good person, she understands the purpose of evil and its goal. How do we see that, you say? Well, because Korra doesn't close down the portals. Unalaq fought and destroyed so many things to open them. What led to their opening was and is evil, but Korra understands the purpose of evil and is able to see the good in all of it anyway. That choice completely makes sense now, but without the setup of her being a second-rate individual, it doesn't make much sense for her to find what makes her special. In book 3, Korra now understands what her goal is, her purpose as the Avatar, so what now? You put her in a dead end because this whole story is a case of force majeure. Thanks to harmonic convergence, the Airbenders are back. Now she has a good understanding in seeing the value in all perspectives to make up her own, but the new Airbenders aren't like that. And because she's the best at it, it means that everyone she'll meet is worse than her, meaning that she'll get frustrated and won't know what to do once again. Not only that, but make her enemy someone who's the total opposite of Korra. Jaded individuals that are so entrenched in their ideals that they refuse to see anything worthwhile in any opposite perspective. I think the correct term is ideologically possessed, but honestly we can just say that Zahir and his gang are revolutionaries and they want to enact their perspective on the world without further consideration because they are so sure of the righteousness of their viewpoint. Zahir shows Korra that even if she's the best at understanding other perspectives, that doesn't mean she'll succeed at sharing that unified viewpoint. Episode 9, The Stakeout, shows exactly this, where he says,
Exactly. The natural order is disorder.
Meaning he understands the opposite position to his viewpoint, lawfulness, but rejects it for an all-encompassing theory of chaos, if you will. The Red Lotus and Book 3 of Korra is by far one of the best seasons in a cartoon I've ever seen. The nuances to the conflict are really fucking deep, and how they make that accessible to kids is honestly really impressive. The writing is amazing. The lines Zahir says while killing the Earth Queen in episode 10 are incredibly badass and presents his character in such an efficient manner that you have to ask yourself what the writers smoked to make something so sick. Enter the Void, episode 12 might be my favorite out of the entire show. It's only made better by the fact that season 3 doesn't shy away from showing what bending is capable of doing. Zahir kills the queen by controlling the air she breathes out of her body. It's something people have been wondering about for years, and the writers present it in a clever way. Yeah, you can pull the air out of someone's lungs, but to do so requires a great deal of concentration and time, both of which you don't have when fighting a direct battle against another bender. They show how to counter combustion bending, wrap metal around the bender's head, let them blow themselves up. People have been wondering for a long ass time if benders could bend molten lava. The answer is yes. So many world-building answers are given that it makes you wonder where the fuck all of that was a couple of seasons prior, or even in The Last Airbender itself. It gives the show an air of seriousness previously unseen, with both Book 1 and Book 2 being a little goofy in their own right at certain times. And you know what the best part about this season is? Even though they're able to capture Zahir and they technically achieve their goal of stopping him, Korra doesn't win. Yeah, she's the best at understanding the opposite perspective, but that doesn't automatically translate into being a better fighter or a better person or a better anything. It shows how little she actually knows. Even though she's the best at something, that something is not what's needed in the world right now. Zahir destabilizes the Earth Kingdom completely, and he's able to fulfill his mission of fucking up Korra's ability to bring balance to the world. She's fucking crippled, for God's sake. She can't even walk or put on clothes or shit by herself. She may have won the fight, but she lost the war. She was finally able to find her calling, but it wasn't enough. How people can find this stupid and boring and brush it off as little more than some cool fights and shitty dialogue is completely beyond me. Anyway, to wrap this season up, Korra found her calling, yet it is not what's needed of her to help the people and the world around her. So she has to start from square one. Literally. Finally, in Book 4, we have our final setup. In the wake of Zahir's revolution in the Earth Kingdom, Kuvira appears. She used to be the captain of the guard back in Zaofu, the Metal City where a lot of Book 3 took place. Nicknamed the Great Uniter, her goal is to bring back order to the Earth Kingdom. Not only that, but she appears to be working for a good cause, making her the third villain on our alignment chart. That will not be for long, however, as we understand that Kuvira is only using this image as a facade, hiding her true intentions behind the narrative of bringing the former glory of the Earth Kingdom back by bringing its former provinces back together. Clever one she is. Meanwhile, Korra has to deal with her being crippled, her realizing she is most unfit of the title of Avatar, and her realizing her previous attempt at carving a path for herself only led to more destruction around her. This seems like a regular setup where the hero is at its lowest point and rises against the tyrannical force imposed against it. As you probably noticed by now, I'm not one for believing this show follows a traditional story, and neither do the writers apparently, as Korra essentially never fully comes back to her former state of both being and mind. This is exemplified by the cutting of her hair, and Korra doing something she's never really done before: act wisely. Funnily enough, this is best shown by the most hated episode of Season 4, because of course it would be. Most people didn't even get the proper message out of the first 3 seasons, so it's no surprise they'd missed the one in Season 4. People think Remembrances is a filler episode. People think Remembrances is just due to budget cuts. People say Remembrances is just clips with a funny recap story throughout the episode. I'm actually going to sound fucking crazy, but bear with me. Remembrances is genuinely one of the better episodes of Season 4, and that's because it's amazingly brilliant at what it does. It's basically a quote-unquote Korra meets an anime abridged episode, and it delves into the structure of the show itself, what its message is and how it conveys it. It's a tour de force in self-awareness for the first 2 retelling of events. Mako and Korra go over their perspective of the events that transpired during the show. Mako's retelling essentially serves 2 purposes. The first is to validate the fact that the people around Korra affect her just as much as she affects them. This is something that makes the legend of Korra stand apart from The Last Airbender, as the former had the nasty habit of sometimes making Aang impervious to the acts and words of his friends. The second is to offer on a silver platter what makes Korra truly different as the Avatar. Just wait, I'll get right to it, but you might guess what I'm talking about if you've seen the show before. Then, Korra's retelling serves 2 purposes as well. The first is to explain how this moment in time is Korra's true lowest point. It's the moment where Korra is genuinely, actively and consciously thinking about stopping her endeavors as the current avatar of the world. While Mako might know what makes Korra unique, Korra herself has no idea, and she's stuck. The dead end she manages to escape from is only met with another one. She can now be physically engaged with the world, but her purpose is still vague, so her mind has nowhere to go. She's basically lost. Then Tenzin does the most badass shit ever, which indirectly confirms the force majeure theory. He says,
"It's true, there will always be new conflicts and enemies to face. But the important thing is to learn from your enemies and better yourself over time, which you have. You've changed so much since you first arrived on Air Temple Island. When you first came here, you were hot-headed and a bit selfish. But you've matured into a thoughtful young woman who puts the needs of others before herself. The new Air Nation is a testament to that. You sacrificed everything to save them. You're an inspiration to the world."
he literally says she had to lose everything in order to help other people. She doesn't have anything left. She's at the very end of the rope, but the encouraging words of her mentor keeps her holding on to that rope and not letting go of it. This is a super important moment in the show, and people glance over it because apparently this is just a filler clips episode? Jesus fucking Christ, man. I mean, how else do you want them to speak about this type of stuff? They're recalling and confirming shit about the show. You have to show the show. What else are you gonna put on screen? Fucking seals getting clobbered? Now, this is convenient because they also had a low budget. Yes, I understand that. However, it's not because a studio has no money and has to adapt to their situation that it necessarily makes for bad content. Just like video game graphics don't make for interesting gameplay, an interesting presentation doesn't make for good content. It certainly doesn't hurt it, but it doesn't equal automatically to it. I can think of several games with what people could consider bad graphics, but an amazing story and a fresh perspectives on subject I didn't even think of thinking of. Well, in the realm of animation, quote-unquote bad animation being used as a tool for storytelling certainly isn't new. Think of Ping Pong the animation, which I'll probably make a video on someday, or the final episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And honestly speaking, the studio already had budget issues. Since season 2, the animation was pretty wacky from time to time, but that is perfectly fine as long as the story being told is worthwhile to the audience, which I hope I made abundantly clear previously. Anyway, back to remembrances and to the best character in this show, Varric. And because he's the most wacky, most uncharacteristic character in the show, I think it's only fair that the writers use him as a way to speak about their work so far. Through the episode, they make various statements about the show very clear. Things that could be inferred fairly easily in my opinion, but ended up confusing the audience more than anything else. Mako explains his actions were driven by personal flaws, where he tries to please everyone and therefore ends up disappointing everyone. And Korra explains her thoughts and mind state at her lowest point. Then you got Varric, who literally calls Zahir a chaos machine, confirming that the characters in the show do follow some type of alignment system, and also confirming a pattern within the show that's permeated throughout its runtime. The darkest moment is always before the dawn. Oh, but that's not all. He also makes the villains look like a fucking joke. I mean, it's essentially one big joke. He fucking calls Vaatu an evil kite, something that I was absolutely not ready for, and instantaneously died of laughter right after he said it. Which reminds me that I should probably record myself when I watch future shows. Oh well, for another review I suppose. They literally have a bit in the Varric part where the main villains all talk to each other on the phone like it's a goddamn skit from a scary movie film. To me, this means one thing. The writers not only know what they're doing, but they're also aware of what their audience thought of the show at the time. And this whole shtick is their way of saying, hey, we get it. We know some of this shit is probably ridiculous to you, but please believe us when we say it serves a purpose. I think an alternate way of reading this whole episode could also be you don't need every piece of lore about a show to enjoy it, but I don't think that's quite accurate. Anyhow, this episode is a pearl and a breath of fresh air in how the story of Avatar was told, because this essentially sets up the last 5 episodes perfectly. Kuvira versus Korra is the end product of the Legend of Korra. The stakes are incredibly high, and with what we've seen right beforehand in season 3, there's a real chance Korra might lose this battle. This is in stark contrast to the ending of The Last Airbender, because Kuvira poses a real threat to the world and Korra. Even though she has a reasonable goal of uniting the Earth Kingdom back together and claiming land that was initially her people's in the hope of securing a better future for them. Korra fights Kuvira with the help of her friends and allies and eventually manages to defeat her and her big-ass robot. However, Kuvira refuses to yield and instead tries to fight the Avatar, to her own demise if needed. This leads to her almost dying in the process, but Korra steps in and saves her life. The energy from the blast of her spirit canon, tears a new spirit portal into the fabric of reality and obliterates a part of Republic City. She could have easily let Kuvira die, yet Korra decided to act wisely and became the complete opposite of Kuvira, even though they resemble each other quite a lot. Throughout Season 4, we see Kuvira for what she truly is, a ruthless woman who will stop at nothing to get what she wants. And in the final moment of the show, we see Korra for what she truly is, someone whose duty is not only to get and incorporate opposing viewpoints into a unified understanding of them, but to also show mercy on the people who are misguided in their attempt to enact those viewpoints into the world. Only the Avatar can do that in this world. Think of any conflicts in the show between characters other than the ones starring Korra. Amon fights Republic City, and both want to destroy the other because they believe they have nothing to gain from keeping the other around. Unalaq fights the Southern Water Tribe, and the Southern Water Tribe fights the Northern Water Tribe, and both want to destroy each other because they believe they have nothing to gain from keeping the other around. Zahir and the World Lotus fight the World Powers, and the World Powers fight Zahir and the Red Lotus, and both want to destroy each other because they believe they have nothing to gain from keeping the other around. Kuvira fights against Republic City fights against Kuvira, and you see where I'm going with this by now. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, can bring balance back to the world. In the last Airbender, this was assumed, and they rolled with this assumption for this entire show. In The Legend of Korra, the creators followed this assumption, but also added 2 words after this statement. But why? Well, by the end of Season 4, we get our answer. Because even in the worst possible scenario, the Avatar can still make sense of it all by fulfilling her duty of understanding each perspective and offering a merciful alternative to any conflict. That, my friends, is the story of The Legend of Korra. It's force majeure meets Avatar. It's really fucking good. It delves into deep matters of personal struggle, meaninglessness, and growth. I really can't shake off the statements that some people made, especially that Korra is a Mary Sue that always wins and has plot armor. She arguably leaves the world in a worse state than when she came into it. She goes through some extremely rough shit. And some people have the audacity to call her an overpowered, annoying, badly written character that's in a shitty, boring, and predictable story. If this whole segment doesn't convince you otherwise, I genuinely don't know what will, but if you are open to changing your mind on the subject, I highly suggest, once again, to go watch it with the case of force majeure in mind. I can totally see why without it, this would be a much worse experience, but I cannot bring myself to call it bad when I had a great time with it. And I'm sure you'll have a great time too if you go ahead and give this show a shot. The third biggest issue people have with Korra goes beyond pacing and storytelling and has to do with the intricacies of the show itself. The world building. A lot of people take issue with the world building, and yeah, I get it. Let me go over what I thought was good about it, and we'll quickly move on to what I consider a valid criticism of the show. First off, the expansion of the previously known limits of bending is a welcome addition to the world of Avatar, and is an interesting look into the evolution of the initial premise of the show, with humanity being able to control the 4 basic elements of the world. We now have combustion benders, lava benders, and metal benders, with the addition of a few really cool and unique techniques like flight, spirit bending, and being able to project your body thanks to spiritual airbending. It's a logical step forward of the 4 elements already established, and expands the possibilities of what the show can offer and explore. All very nice. Second, the much needed answers to a lot of questions that were asked in The Last Airbender or even in Korra itself. A big one I had personally was, wait, so the Water Tribe has healing abilities with water, but what about the other elements? How can they sustain their war efforts without healing their wounded? Do they hire waterbenders for that purpose? I believe it's at the beginning of the episodes with Avatar 1, where they answer how the Avatar came to be in the first place, that they also answer my question. They have this shaman from the Fire Nation, who's able to tell there's a dark energy in Korra, something we've only seen waterbenders with healing abilities be able to do. Then they lower her into a pool of water, probably spiritually connected in some way, and she's able to heal over time thanks to that. That's a really cool moment in my opinion, because it essentially gives us a pretty important piece of lore without saying a word about it. Other nations probably have their own healing techniques, each different in some ways, but water is still the element who's the most potent when it comes to healing wounds of any sort. Very neat, and these kinds of moments are peppered through the show, you just have to look for them. Thirdly, the political landscape of Avatar is more diverse than ever before thanks to its modernization. I genuinely don't know what else to call it. Anyway, yeah, the show is able to explore way more ideologies and modes of thinking than The Last Airbender could ever do. I mean, we got an egalitarian, a fascist, an anarchist, and a commie tyrant, and that's just for the main villains. We also have the expansion of each ideology for the four nations, with the Fire Nations having changed the most in my opinion. There's also the United Republic, which represents a more urban and libertarian expression of society, as well as the United Forces, which is essentially a military conglomerate sourcing its power from every nation. This is honestly kinda neat, as it allows the show to source its inspirations from many other real ideologies and conflicts. However, I think it's fair to say that Korra has a massive flaw when it comes to its world building. One that kind of overpowers anything good you can say about it. And it's the thematic shift The Legend of Korra does to separate itself from the style of The Last Airbender. Remember when I said our whole understanding of the Avatar universe is replaced with something so advanced that it's essentially new altogether? Well, I said it's fine, I didn't say it was good. It's a fine choice because it makes the setting of Korra an almost totally distinct experience from the one you get in The Last Airbender. And that's needed when you tell a story that essentially questions the foundation of what the show is about. If you had it in the same time period, it would probably just end up invalidating the first show. However, having it in a completely new period of time also removes a lot of potential options from a storytelling perspective. You simply have to explain to the audience that the things that have changed because it is what it is, and let's move on onto something more important because it really doesn't matter all that much. Which is why I think it's a fine choice, but it's something that I don't totally agree with, because I think it kind of goes against what they're trying to do with the world building so far. They're trying to open up more doors for the writers to do cool shit, but close one of the biggest hallways full of amazing doors, the transition period. I mean, try to picture this. Korra appears in Republic City to learn airbending. She enters a city which is very clearly divided by its multiple cultures and ideologies, but united under a common goal, to live in harmony. You have this clash between the traditional way of living against the modern approach, all shown by the architecture of the city. People are still unsure as to the utilization of modern machines, considering them scary or evil, or something like that. So cars, motorized transport, all that jazz really isn't all that common, but it's instead reserved to a very small part of the population, which would be the forward-thinking, progressive, and maybe even reckless elite of the world. This is all cranked up to 11 when the Airbenders come back. What to make of this new world they're in? Should they return to their traditions or embrace a new modern standard of living? What about the Fire Nation? Wouldn't it be amazing to have this clash between the younger generation of folks unsure of what to make of their ancestors' history and the older generation completely resolved on convincing other firebenders their cause was just? There is so much untapped potential in that possible transition period where turmoil would be sure to happen and individuals trying to profit off of that turmoil are just as certain. That means the Avatar would pretty much always have something to do in the world, especially if Korra has to fail those objectives for the sake of the message. It's even better because those periods in history are always gray and difficult to manage. It's a perfect setting, yet the creators decided to move on to something new entirely for, well, whatever reason they had, I guess. I'm not in their head, unfortunately, and I can only guess as to why they chose not to go with that setting instead of the one we got. This is, unfortunately, the least of my concerns when it comes to the Legends of Korra's issue, as I believe there is plenty of criticism left to be made on it. I just also happen to believe a lot of people are disingenuous when it comes to criticizing this show, and because of that, they present a false narrative as the one true way of looking at the show, which is fucking stupid. Don't do that shit, that's mega cringe. But instead of bashing on other content creators, because honestly I don't think that's gonna add anything to the video at this point, here's what I believe to be genuine flaws The Legend of Korra has, with which we can get a better picture of how well the show stands. I think the most obvious one is perhaps the clarity of the information displayed on the show. Sometimes when you watch Korra, you're just sitting there asking yourself, wait, how the fuck did that happen? Or where the fuck did that come from? It's super weird to me because sometimes the show is extremely clear with what it's telling you or trying to convey across the visuals, like when Toph comes back in season 4 to train and help Korra out. I immediately caught on to the relationship they were trying to build between those two characters because it's so similar to the reference they are drawing from. I mean, an old master in a swamp with a younger pupil that's lost and seeking knowledge that will make them powerful. It's literally Yoda and Luke from Star Wars. And you know what? But I kinda liked that moment because it was an outlier in what is otherwise a very muddled show. In the same season, Korra learns to tap into the spiritual energy of the swamp tree. Okay, cool, except when she gets to Republic City, she taps into the spiritual energy of the vines. Then you're left wondering, wait, so there's a spirit energy in any vines? Or is it just the vines that are sprung up from spirit activity? Well, we get part of that answer at the very end of the show when the spirit portal opens and a shitload of vines appear. Okay, cool, except when she's chasing after the people who kidnapped Prince Wu, she taps into the spiritual energy of the fucking concrete that makes up the train station? What? Hold on, is there spirit energy in anything now? How the fuck is she able to do that out of nowhere? That seems awfully convenient now, doesn't it? Well, not entirely. 2 episodes later, they revealed that the Avatar is able to tap into spiritual energy of any place through its material form. So any material can serve as a conduit for her trying to track spiritual energy. It's just that some materials are better than others because they're more spiritually inclined. But that's something that should be made clear from the get-go, not something I have to figure out for myself or wait a long time to understand. Because it's such a massive shift in how we perceive the Avatar and her powers that if it isn't explained or made clear immediately, we don't fucking get it because we're not the writers. And then people can get stuck up on small details which completely fucks with their head and doesn't allow them to enjoy the show. Here's a personal favorite of mine, the Avatar state. I think I've noticed something that not a lot of people did, which is that the Avatar state actually seems to be split into 2 modes. The first seems to be the Avatar tuning itself to the spiritual lineage and connection it possesses. When Korra was chained up and the venom of the Red Lotus was introduced in her, her eyes flicker on and off. It seems there's a sort of beginning phase, like revving up an engine, where the Avatar can activate some of her powers but not all of them. Korra then starts seeing crazy shit around her. Then, after the engine is fully warmed up, the Avatar State Mode 2 activates. It's where she can use all 4 elements, goes batshit insane crazy strong, you know the deal. When Korra later ejects the remaining venom out of herself, she goes into the Avatar State Mode 1 because she's able once again to be in harmony with her spiritual side. But she doesn't start throwing hands with anyone or anything. This isn't something the show ever tells you, but it's even present at the end of The Last Airbender. When Aang heals the land after stealing Ozai's bending, he doesn't go into the full Avatar state. Instead, he taps into his spiritual side, goes back to his natural state and does his thing, just because he needs the guidance. This is never explained in the show, but the more you look at it, the more it becomes obvious. This is very clearly something that needs to be said to the audience because it's super important to one of the core parts of what makes an Avatar. Another great example of this is how Kuvira essentially pulls out the equivalent of an Ava out of her ass. I genuinely had to stop the show and process what I was seeing because it's so incredibly uncanny. It's like going to the supermarket and seeing a tank doing its groceries. What the fuck are you doing here, man? But the more the episode progressed, the more it started to make sense to me. More than Ozai's big-ass golden ship, at least. You would want the leader of your army in something that's heavily armored, especially if she's a vital part of the Warforce front. And to me, it's a clever way to combine everything that's new to the world building of Avatar. It's platinum, so metal benders cannot bend it because of its purity, but the levels are made of regular metal so she can easily move them around. However, the vital controls of the big-ass robot are made of meteorite, which takes a while to get used to in terms of bending, so no earthbenders can infiltrate the thing and take it over. It's also got self-protection measures, and it isn't powered by electrical current. It runs entirely off of spiritual energy. So this is all really fucking cool, right? But my question is, where the fuck does it come from? Where the fuck did she learn how to make an Ava, and when did she learn how to pilot it? Are you seriously trying to tell me that the Varric copycat came up with the design on his own? Really? He's a fucking architect, not a war machine designer. If he did, how did it come to be? And it's at that moment I realized big-ass constructs in Avatar are nothing new. Aang made one to defend the Water Tribe. Unalaq and Korra had their moment too. He didn't come up with it, he just did what he knows best. He copied. This could have all been explained with a single phrase in a single scene, where Bataar Jr. says where he got the inspiration from when working on the robot. It would have taken like 3 shots and a single line to Kuvira or something earlier in the season, and it would have been perfectly clear. But the legend of Korra isn't clear, and it's really fucking annoying when it comes between yourself and the show. It really makes you stop dead in your tracks and makes you go, hold on, wait a minute, park your car and explain this shit to me because I don't want to go any further without you telling me what this is all about. The second flaw I can attribute to The Legend of Korra without a single second of hesitation is the fact that they're trying too hard to pull off the original appeal of The Last Airbender. Some stuff in the show is simply too goofy and out of tune. Now, this might not be the most popular opinion because people seem to really like the fact that some of the old characters make quite the comeback or are linked in various ways to the characters we see in the show. We get scenes where Zuko, Katara, and Toph help Korra. We have Lin and Sue, who are daughters of Toph. We have Izumi, who is the daughter of Zuko and current Fire Lord. We have Tenzin and his kids, who are all descendants of Aang. I feel like most of the plot points and story beat with those characters are mainly irrelevant and are trying to appeal to the nostalgia of the people who used to watch The Last Airbender way too much. I'll give credit to Tenzin and his family. It makes sense that they're the only airbenders who can teach Korra, and that's fine as it is because they do something completely different with it, and I think it's pretty good. With Kaya and Bumi coming through later on, adding a lot of complexity to the whole family dynamic they have. Another cool moment was when Desna, Eska, Zuko, and Korra's dad were all going to check out the prison of the combustion chick from Zahir's gang. The moment they share where they recall how they all tried to kill the Avatar at one point is really fucking funny, and I had a good laugh at it. Otherwise though, it gets old really fast. Katara is the best healer in the land, so we must go see her to heal the characters. Really? There isn't a single other healer in the Water Tribe we could get to learn about? Maybe Katara never had a disciple for whatever reason, and now some people are trying their best to learn anew what she never taught to people? Wouldn't that be super sick? Same thing with Lin and Sue being Thoth's daughter. Is that really necessary? Did Thoth really need to be the chief of police in Republic City? Aang was pretty old by that point. He could have met other people along the way to put in charge. It doesn't really add anything that they're Thoth's daughter. Put any competent metal bender in her place and the storyline still holds together. But from what I can see, The Legend of Korra is scared to leave The Last Airbender's heritage in the past. You can even see remnants of The Last Airbender's way of storytelling in how the episodes are constructed. Think of the last episode of Book 3, The Venom of the Red Lotus. In the same episode, we have Kai trying to make a funny haha moment when they escape, right after Korra gets fucking poisoned and is shown tripping balls and being scared for her goddamn life. Fucking hell, even Sokka knew to be a little more serious when he faced off against Ozai. Like, there's a very real chance Korra can get absolutely fucked up here. We've seen the writers not be scared at all to do some crazy shit like destroy the Avatar's past life, so who knows what the fuck could happen? The stakes have never been higher before, and Kai fucking flirts with Jinora? Hello? What kind of absolutely moronic thing is that to do in that kind of situation? Like, same episode once again, right? Sue is helping Korra get most of the poison out. She almost fucking died and the entire Avatar lineage with her also. She's clutching at her dad for comfort. He's on the verge of tears because his daughter is dying in his arms. Zahir is ecstatic about the prospect of his plan working, and when Sue gets the poison out, he gets mad because his enemies don't understand his point of view. And then, right as he's about to lash out and deliver a great speech because we know Zahir has great writing, Bolin shoves his fucking sock in his mouth. Even fucking Opal cringes. For some, this might be funny. For me, this is proof the show's creators aren't fully committed to showing a moment of true desperation on their show. Something The Last Airbender also did. The difference here, however, is that Korra is going through a case of force majeure, and it also wishes to explore deeper, darker themes than The Last Airbender. So applying the same techniques of pressure release as The Last Airbender is ridiculous, but they do so because they want to keep the same appeal as they had on The Last Airbender. But they don't need the same appeal because this isn't The Last Airbender, and this is making me crazy. And why did he shove a sock in the mouth of the dude who just tried to kill one of his best friends? You should be fucking angry at him. This was the one time it would have made sense for you to do so. Let's just move on. I hope you get the point. The third and most critical of the show's flaws is over-ambition. I think it's safe to say that The Legend of Korra tried to do many things. And that's fine. If you don't have any ambition when making a piece of media, you'll most likely end up with a terrible end product. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say, but this is something else entirely, and I kinda hinted at it in the last point. The Legend of Korra tries to do too many things for what they could output. The speed of the show is a testament to this, although I don't think the pace in itself is a bad thing. But with a fast pace comes focus usually. If you're going to be telling a story that progresses really fast, you usually want to keep it pretty simple, and that's because there's less room for mistakes. If you're making something really complex, you usually want to go slow because there's less room for mistakes. The Legend of Korra tried to do a really complex story really fast. And to the creator's credit, it did work, but not as well as they intended for it to work, I believe. Just think of the dichotomy between the visuals and the explanations. The show is explicitly trying to cater to both younger and older audiences, and again, it kinda worked, just not as well as it could have worked if they focused their efforts on one or the other instead. The visual storytelling lacked in many cases the sufficient support from the audio side of things to make everything crystal clear to the viewer. The explanations and dialogue often lacked real depth because only parts of the visual presentation was aimed towards building off of the dialogue. They tried to tell a dark, rich, and emotional story, but that isn't what most people got out of it because the clarity of the information displayed wasn't high enough that the audience could immediately understand it. Instead, because of their prior engagement in trying to cater to kids, they had to punctuate that story with moments that resembled their prior work more than something entirely new, which led to the assumption that this was going to be a Last Airbender 2.0, which it absolutely is not. Then, by Season 2, people realized this wasn't going to be The Last Airbender 2.0, but by that point, this wasn't what they initially signed up for, so they felt like The Legend of Korra was a bad show for not following the framework of The Last Airbender. I think you can really see this in one very important episode, perhaps the most important episode of the entire show. The first one. The first episode is supposed to set the tone for the series. It's where you blow your animation budget to show people what can be done throughout the series. It's where you tell the audience what kind of ride they're getting onto. Let's break it down really quick and dirty, and I think you'll see the pieces of the puzzle fit together perfectly. Yeah, that's right, I'm doing that video essay trick where I pull you back all the way to the beginning. We start the episode with a recap of the events of the previous show. It's made clear that this is a sequel to The Last Airbender. Tenzin narrates that Aang's time is up, and we cut to Korra being discovered by the White Lotus as the next avatar. That scene is super goofy, with Korra saying,
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
Echoing what Tenzin said earlier. Korra fucks up some dudes and says,
Woohoo! Hey, why all the doom and gloom, people? We should be celebrating. 3 elements down, 1 to go.
We get a cool scene with Korra riding around on Naga, and then Tenzin's family shows up. We then get the scene where Jinora asks Katara about the events of the previous show and then gets cut off by Ikki. This scene is amazing, and I did say we'd get back to it, so here we are. It's great because it demonstrates fully that The Legend of Korra understands it's a sequel but wants to do something else entirely. However, it is stuck in using a funny haha moment scene to convey this and therefore binds itself from the very first episode onward. Because the funny haha moment scenes are a staple of The Last Airbender, and if you're gonna be using those in The Legend of Korra, then you're not doing anything new. Korra says screw you and gets to Republic City, and we see the Avatar being a fairly incompetent beacon of justice. Just like we saw Aang being a fairly incompetent beacon of justice in the first episodes of the first book of The Last Airbender. People were totally right to believe The Legend of Korra was just gonna be more of the same type of story we got in The Last Airbender, just with a different setting. And then people got mad at the setting because it was so different from what people experienced in The Last Airbender. I'm not saying these people were right, however. I think you should keep an open mind about these types of things and accept it's not gonna be the same if it doesn't want to be the same, and bashing a labor of love with a good story and a good message is fucking childish if you don't provide a complete picture of the show. But what I'm saying is that I understand their position. And it's not their fault for feeling this way. The show bit off more than it could chew. I mean, here, I'll just show you. Put yourself in a position where you never saw The Legend of Korra or any spoilers about it, anything. Could you really predict that this would lead to this if you only saw the first episode? I really don't think so. I know for sure I couldn't. The tone of the show shifts drastically as the story progresses, and I think it leads to good storytelling, but going from one tone to the other seemingly out of nowhere is daunting to people, and I really believe it's the main reason why so many people stopped watching the show. Yeah, they switched time slots on Nickelodeon, and yeah, the second season is not the best season of animated television ever made, but if people feel like they've engaged themselves in a story that doesn't reflect what they're looking for out of a television program, they're gonna stop watching. It's that simple. At the end of the day, I want to remind you, I'm just a dude with free time writing his thoughts and broadcasting them on the internet for all to see. If you've made it this far, I think it's only fair to say this. Please go watch these shows, but don't fall for what you see online. Take a step back, think for yourself, and go into both of them with an open mind. I can guarantee you'll have a great time with both of them, even if you might not totally be the target demographic for both of these shows. That doesn't really matter, however. If you enjoy something for what it is, you can watch or read or look at anything and see some amount of merit in it. And if you can see merit in something, then perhaps you'll be able to take away a message, an idea, or a concept that can help you in some way, shape, or form. The Last Airbender is a fun delve into what makes a person grow. The Legend of Korra is a more serious take on why a person should grow and how this growth comes to be. They both have valid messages, and the fact that they're able to convey these messages to children pretty effectively make them a worthwhile addition to the list of stuff you'll want to show your kids when talking about stuff from your childhood. I mean, I don't know, maybe you'll just be able to talk about it with strangers on Discord, and that's plenty good enough, I guess. As this is a review, I think scores are in order. For The Last Airbender, I give a score of 7.5 out of 10. For The Legend of Korra, I give a score of 8 out of 10. Bear in mind that I am fairly critical when I give out ratings. A show like High Guardian Spice might only score a 2 or 3 out of 10. For a show to get a 10 out of 10, it would have to be truly exceptional. 9 out of 10s are amazing, 8 out of 10s are really good. I consider 8 out of 10 to be the verge of greatness. The Last Airbender is a great show, but nothing more than that. The way they have structured and told their story doesn't make me believe it could go any higher. The Legend of Korra could have definitely been something much greater than it is. There's clear ways the show could be improved, and if those improvements would have been made, it would have become truly amazing. Like I said before, even an above average cartoon which would rank 6.5 or 7 out of 10 is already extremely rare. There's so much garbage littering the genre that it's hard to argue against the fact that these two series are already really great in that regard. So obviously, take this rating with a grain of salt. If you're still here after all of this, I want to thank you for watching this video. It took me a lot of time to write and assemble it, so I hope you liked it, even though you might not have agreed with everything I said. I just wish you had a good time and it was informative in its own way. If you liked what you saw, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel as well as follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Now that Season 1 is over, I will probably be resuming weekly to monthly uploads, but the funny numbers going up always make me feel happy. I also try to read everything people leave under my videos, so feel free to tell me your thoughts and opinions in the comments. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. Oh, and if you want to watch another review I made, watch this video next. On that note, stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you in another video. Peace.